Chapter 775. The three northern counties of the Tang Empire were shrouded in a bloody storm. This was the real battlefield. The cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe from the south of the wilderness fought with the cavalrymen of the Tang Empire in the fertile wilderness. The battlefield stretched for hundreds of miles. There were battles and deaths every second. On the battlefield, the priests of the Golden Tribe royal court and the cultivators of the Tang Empire kept fighting. The chi of heaven and earth trembled. Countless cavalrymen charged fearlessly. The wilderness had long been painted red. In the Pamir Mountains, the Tang Empire's western army under the command of General Shu Qing finally defeated the army of the Yueluan Kingdom on the plateau and won a decisive victory after sacrificing more than 20,000 soldiers. Due to the long journey and the shortage of supplies, the Tang Empire's western army did not return to the three northern counties. Instead, they entered the Pamir Mountains and attacked the Yueluan Kingdom in the cold weather. The eastern border of the Tang Empire, which had not seen a war for many years, was now in a state of blood and fire. Tens of thousands of grassland cavalrymen were wreaking havoc in the wilderness. 800 cavalrymen led tens of thousands of volunteers and the remnants of the northeast border military who returned from the Yan Kingdom. They carried out the fiercest resistance and gradually reversed the extremely passive situation. Fighting on their own land could receive strong support from the temporary government office and the Tang people. Apart from that, the most important reason why the Tang army could reverse the situation so quickly in the eastern border was that the grassland cavalrymen lacked a commander. Prince Long Qing had gotten rid of this group of subordinates many days ago. Long Qing did not leave the battlefield alone. He took with him nearly 1,000 of the most elite cavalrymen of Divine Hall and more than 2,000 absolutely loyal cavalrymen of the left King's Palace. The world war against the Tang Empire had been going on for some time. The clear autumn gradually passed and the winter wind gradually rose. The fertile wilderness of the Tang Empire was frozen and hard. Every time the horses stepped on it, there would be smoke and dust. More than 3,000 cavalrymen galloped on the central wilderness of the Tang Empire. From afar they looked like a yellow dragon. The cavalrymen were already extremely tired after the continuous high-speed attacks. Even Long Qing felt that he could not hold on any longer. But he did not give the order to rest. The main force of the Tang Empire had been mobilized. Other than the ordinary prefectural armies, there was no defense force in the central counties. There was no way they could stop the cavalrymen. At this time, Long Qing and his cavalrymen were close to Chang'an City. Of course he could not rest. He knew that Chang'an City was about to open and there was no defense in the city. The roads around Chang'an City were covered in dust and footprints. Abandoned luggage could also be seen. These were the traces left behind by the refugees in the surrounding areas. What was fortunate or admirable was that under the joint efforts of the Tang Empire, nearly 1 million refugees were brought into the city in just 2 days. There was not a single corpse on the road. The provisions transported from the various counties had already entered the city even earlier. The surrounding counties and villages had been completely abandoned, fortifying the walls and clearing the fields. All the city gates had already been closed, leaving only the southern gate facing Vermilion Bird Avenue open for people to enter and exit. There were few pedestrians outside the city gate, and a few soldiers were vigilantly watching all directions outside the city. Chang'an City was ready for battle, and they were full of confidence. The borders of the country had been broken, but the mountains and rivers were still there. Whether it was the imperial court of the Tang Empire or the people in the city, they all thought that the enemy they were about to face should be the West Hill Divine Palace army going north from the Verdant Canyon. No one thought that on the official road in the east, Prince Long Qing was leading the cavalry to break through, and no one knew who the real enemy of Chang'an City was. Therefore they did not understand why the imperial court had never closed the southern gate, and why so many people and resources were mobilized to move the giant stones outside the southern gate at such a critical moment. Only the academy and the empress in the palace knew the real reason. The God-stunning array had been damaged. Chang'an City could now resist all kinds of armies but could not resist the real enemy. The enemy that put Chang'an City in danger was not the cavalry of the Golden Palace, not Long Qing and his cavalry, not the mighty Divine Hall army in the south. It was just one person. A very scary person. A young girl stood outside the southern gate, looking at the giant stones in the field and feeling the familiar smell. Her ponytail swayed gently in the cold wind, and she somewhat missed the past. Ning Kai stood behind her, and his haggard expression finally relaxed a little. Although the blockage of the God-stunning array was still there, it would be much more difficult to enter the city with this stone array tactics. The girl was naturally the Academy's third sister, Yu Lian. She did not allow herself to immerse in such sentiments for too long, and calmly said, "After all, we still have to repair Chang'an City." Ning Ke said, "Still not enough?" Yu Lian said, "The headmaster has left the human world. In this world there are only 4 people who can be called extraordinary. 2 of them don't care about worldly affairs, and the chief preaching monk's law follows the thick soil. So the only one who can threaten Chang'an City is the Abbey Dean. This stone array tactics can at most stop him for a while, but how can it stop him for a lifetime?" Mo Shanshan slightly frowned and seemed a little worried. Ning Ke had never seen the legendary Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey. He thought that eldest brother had delayed this person for a few days, but he did not feel that the person was very powerful. Hearing this, he could not help but frown slightly. Yu Lian said, "Since the God-stunning array has been broken, if eldest brother did not use his life to stop us, all of us would have been killed by the Abbey Dean, and the war would have been over." Ning Ke said, "Eldest brother and senior sister, you have also broken the 5 states." Yu Lian said, "The 5 states are just a threshold. Breaking the 5 states does not mean that one is absolutely powerful. Although I have broken the 5 states, I may not be able to defeat Liu Bai. But the Abbey Dean is different." Ning Ke asked, "What's the difference?" Yu Lian said, "Do you know who is the youngest cultivator to break the 5 states in history?" Mo Shanshan thought for a while and asked, "My sworn brother?" Yu Lian said, "Eldest brother broke the distance in 3 days, but he was not young at that time. In terms of age, the founder of the Enlightenment doctrine and the great divine priest of light from 600 years ago were both older than him." Ning Ke thought of a possibility but did not say anything. Yu Lian said, "The youngest cultivator to break the 5 states was surnamed Qin." Ning Ke looked at the wet stones in front of the south gate and was shocked speechless. "So I am not surprised that Qin Pipi was the earliest to enter the knowing destiny state." Yu Lian said, "Because his surname is also Qin, and he is the Abbey Dean's son." Ning Ke asked after a moment of silence, "What kind of person is the Abbey Dean?" Yu Lian said, "The Abbey Dean was just an ordinary Taoist in a Taoist temple in the kingdom of Song. He had no talent in cultivation and had never even entered the West Hill Divine Palace. So he gave himself an ordinary name. The kingdom of Song was a small country by the East Sea. It did not have any praiseworthy history, culture, or military. However, it had produced many famous people and great figures. 1,000 years ago, the great divine priest of light was from the kingdom of Song. Wei Guangming was from the kingdom of Song. Master Lotus was from the kingdom of Song. Even the small town where second brother lived as a child should be in the kingdom of Song." Ning Ke did not know until now that the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey was also from the kingdom of Song. It turned out that he had a strange name. "Since I am so amazing, why, I am not famous and even give people a feeling of being ordinary. I'm not an ordinary person, but I can give people a feeling of being ordinary. That is the scariest thing about me." Yu Lian said, "As for the objective reasons, apart from the mysteriousness of the Jishou Abbey, I have been quiet these years mainly because the history of the past decades is a little different." Ning Ke asked, "What is the difference between the history of the past and the history of the past?" Yu Lian said, "The biggest difference between the history of the past and the history books is that the academy began to enter the human realm. In the back of the mountain of the academy, only she did not call him youngest uncle. Instead she called him Mr. Ko. That was because she was the suzerain of the devil's doctrine. After all, the devil's doctrine was destroyed by Kuhauran." Mo Shanshan said softly, "After the trip to the wilderness, I asked the headmaster. He then knew that Master Lotus was still alive. He told me some stories about the past. He said that the Abbey Dean had once fought with Mr. Ku." "That's right." Yu Lian said, "There were no bystanders in the battle between Mr. Ku and the Abbey Dean. Except for the headmaster, no one in the world knows what happened at that time. They only know that Mr. Ku won in the end. After that, all the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism came out and ambushed Mr. Ku in the wilderness. Mr. Ku slashed them to his heart's content. He broke through several states but refused to stop. So he pulled out his sword and flew towards the sky. He was then killed by Haotian. Because of this, the headmaster was extremely indignant. He went to the West Hill Divine Kingdom and slashed all the peach blossoms on the Peach Mountain. He killed countless powerhouses of Haotian Taoism. The Abbey Dean invited the chief preaching monk of the Shenkong Temple to help him, but they still failed. Yu Lian said, "The academy entered the human realm, so the Abbey Dean was nameless." Ning Ke understood what his senior sister said. As the youngest person to break through the 5 realms, Qin Mao undoubtedly had the right to leave his name in the history of cultivation. But because there were 2 other people's names in the history of these years, he did not have a shred of glory. One was the headmaster. the other was Koharan. But from another perspective, it also showed how powerful Chen Mao was. Because he lost to the youngest uncle and the headmaster, but he did not die. He was forced to wander on the South Sea, but he did not die. Maybe the headmaster cherished his talent, or maybe the headmaster really could not kill him. Either way, it proved how powerful he was. The youngest uncle had passed away long ago, and the headmaster had also left the human realm. No one in the human realm was a match for the Abidine. That person's glory that had been suppressed for many years was about to blossom. The enemy that Chang'an City was about to face was such a person. People knew that he was coming, but they did not know when he would come. Ning Ke felt that his shoulders had become a little heavy. He looked over the rugged boulders and fell on the forest beside the official road. Chang'an City had entered winter. The grass was not thick and the wind and snow were coming. Don't laugh, everyone. A man's self-esteem is easy to make a joke at the wrong moment. I had a hard time writing today and I hope it will be done soon. Now it seems that my cervical vertebra is affected. Oh, the reason for not updating is very positive. I hope that the Abidine's battle can also be written with positive energy. I lay down more and I hope to write faster. I'm really sorry and I apologize again because I did not manage myself well. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 776. Yu Lian continued. He had another adventure after coming to the South Sea. Although no one knows the details, the headmaster once sighed with emotion when he saw Pippi when he was still a child. Ning Ke was slightly stunned and said, "The great divine priest of light who disappeared in the South Sea 600 years ago?" Yu Lian said, "Yes. I always think he has gained a lot from this." Ning Ke looked at the stones in front of the south gate and kept silent for a long time. He still felt a little unwilling and asked, "Senior brother and senior sister together, can't we defeat him?" The headmaster once said that life is a cultivation. Yu Lian said, "Sometimes cultivation depends on time. He's lived longer than my senior brother and I, so he's naturally stronger than us. Although my senior brother is talented, he's too gentle. Even if he learned how to fight, he'd still be no match for him." She did not comment on herself, which was also a tacit agreement. Ning Ke also thought of a very troublesome and crucial problem. Third sister was still injured and it might be a very serious injury. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace was a powerhouse beyond the 5 states. Although she was the most mysterious and powerful 23-year cicada cultivation, she had to pay a price to defeat that person. In the current situation, the only thing that could defeat the Abidine of the Jisho Abbey was the God-stunning array. Ning Ke turned around and walked into the city gate, continuing his journey to solve the problem. As time went by, the chi of heaven and earth in Chang'an became more and more stagnant because of the stone array tactics outside the south gate. Especially the dark line between life and death, it was very blocked. Ning Ke walked on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, walking in the block chi of heaven and earth. Countless refugees who evacuated into Chang'an were arranged by the imperial court and the marketplace to live in various residences. There were few pedestrians on the long street, and most of the shops and restaurants along the street were closed. The street was no longer bustling with people. The cold winter wind blew back and forth in the street, making it particularly deserted. The Great Blockage Formation outside the south gate played a very small role. Although it could block the Abidine, it was confirmed that it was impossible to break through the blocked God-stunning array in a short time. Then where could he mobilize so much chi of heaven and earth to repair the God-stunning array? This problem had been bothering him for a long time. He had not slept or rested for several days and nights, racking his brains. Occasionally he would feel something and even have a specific idea, but he could not find a way to implement it. How can those illusory auras turn into real power? Ning Ke looked at the vermilion bird painting in the middle of the street and asked. The vermilion bird did not reply because it did not know either. Ning Ke turned around and continued walking. He thought of the steamed bun shop he had seen on the shore of Yanming Lake that morning, the hot mist on the bluestone, and the realization he had at that time. His mood became more and more depressed. He vaguely understood what he had to do, but he did not know how to do it. He saw hope in front of him, but he didn't know how to grasp it. He saw the other shore, but there was no boat, so his worries grew. He walked out of a quiet alley and suddenly heard the sound of reading coming from behind the wall. Some private tutor was lecturing the students on the laws of the Tang Empire. Judging from their voices, the students were still very young. Their clear and childish voices recited the complicated laws of the Tang Empire. Their voices were uneven, but they were very focused. It was interesting and touching. Seeing that the country was about to fall and the family was about to perish, the sounds of reading could still be heard in the streets. He could still hear the laws of the Tang Empire. This calmness was very touching and even awe-inspiring, because there was a kind of power in this calmness. Ning Kai stood outside the wall and quietly listened to the sound of reading. He listened for a long time. This was the aura of the human world. But how to make this power tangible? The Southern Gate Temple in front of the Imperial Palace was very quiet. Because of the tampering of the edict and He Ming-chi, the attitude of the Imperial Court of the Tang Empire towards the Southern Gate Temple had changed greatly. There were many people hiding outside the Taoist Temple and it was very chilling. Ning Kai walked up the stairs and entered the Southern Gate Temple. The Taoists in the Taoist Temple saw him and could not help but be shocked. Then they came forward and bowed. He was the disciple of Master Yen Sei, and the Taoists in the Southern Gate Temple called him Senior Brother. Ning Kai waved his hand and motioned for the crowd to ignore him. He walked into the quiet Taoist temple alone and stood under the wall. He looked at the stories in the scriptures and the mythical legends and kept silent for a long time. Religion was best at turning the aura of the human world into real power. This was also the so-called power of faith. Although the power of faith of Haotian Taoism was used to pray to Haotian and connect the heaven and the earth to the divine man, which was completely opposite to what he wanted to do now, he wanted to see if he could get some kind of inspiration. Ning Kai walked around Chang'an, just like that summer when he first understood talisman. So he came to Wanyan Tower again and climbed up the Wanyan Tower. Standing by the small window at the top of the tower and looking at the quiet Chang'an city, he asked, "Can people's thoughts really be transformed into concrete power? If so, how do we go through it?" Thoughts themselves have no power, but once they are displayed, they may show some kind of power. Just like His Majesty's Imperial Edict, if it is only a thought in the mind, it will have no effect. Only when he says it out or writes it on paper will his thoughts have any effect. Master Huangyang walked to his side and looked at the last flock of autumn geese gradually flying south. He said, "If the way you asked about is equivalent to a method, then language is a method, and writing is also a method." Ning Kai asked, "What about faith?" Master Huangyang said, "Faith itself has no power. It needs a specific direction. When countless people's faith is concentrated in that direction, the power will be reflected in that direction." Buddha strictly forbids his disciples from setting up idols because of this. Master Huangyang looked at him and continued, "Your master Yen Sei once said that everyone's thoughts are actually a talisman, but they are too weak to be felt. When everyone writes a talisman at the same time, this talisman may appear or even become great." Ning Kai understood something. It was really possible to find a way to summon the power of the human world that could compete with heaven and earth. If he could find that power, he could unblock the God-stunning array. He came to the south bank of Yanming Lake and sat among the frosty grass. He stretched his fingers into the air and copied a few inscriptions. When he calmed down, he began to write and began to look for that word. Having entered the knowing destiny state, any word he wrote was a talisman. Writing was writing talisman. The word he was looking for was actually a talisman. The sun gradually moved west and then fell below the city wall. Night came. He sat by the lake and continued to write talisman. He searched for the word in the talisman. Hundreds of words. Thousands of words. Finally there was only one word left. That word was formed by two straight lines. It was the only divine talisman he knew, the two horizontal talisman. He kept writing the two horizontal talisman until he was exhausted. His eyes brightened and dimmed, then brightened and dimmed again and finally became numb. After an unknown amount of time he stopped writing. He looked at the courtyard across the Yanming Lake in a daze. At this moment, a snowflake drifted down and landed on his body. He thought of the snow that year. He thought of the battle on the snow lake. Sang Sang held the big black umbrella and stood in the wind and snow, singing to the snow lake. If Sang Sang was still there, if the big black umbrella and iron arrows were still there, he was really confident that even if he could not unblock Chang'an City, he could use the God-stunning array to kill that man. However, Sang Sang was already dead. The courtyard across the lake had no lights for many days. The people sent by the imperial court to the Sisui River reported that the big black horse and carriage had disappeared. He had to find the word that could mobilize the power of the human world. The snowflakes continued to fall. A few eyelashes fluttered down. His face was pale but his cheeks were flushed, which looked extremely unhealthy. He looked calm but in fact he was extremely anxious and tired. He could not find the word and he could not write the talisman. Master Yen Sei spent his whole life to find the talisman, let alone him. Ning Kai sighed. A white mist. He raised his finger, continued to write and continued to search. He wrote in the white mist in the falling snow, and on the ground that was gradually covered with snow. Because of fatigue and nervousness, his hand trembled more and more severely. The two strokes of the two horizontal talismans sometimes became a little crooked. It snowed in Chang'an City. This was the first snow in the 18th year of Tianqi. The first snow. The night gradually faded and the morning came. The streets and eaves of the city were covered with white snow, and it was very clean. Last night, the wind came from the north and the south of the city was quiet. Because there was no cold wind, the southern city wall was covered with a light layer of snow. It looked like a white curtain. Suddenly, there was a footprint in the thin snow on the city wall. It was about 100 feet from the ground. The goshawk could build its nest but people could not. But there was one more footprint. After a moment, another footprint appeared in the thin snow on the city wall hundreds of feet away. Then a pair of footprints appeared behind it. The two footprints belonged to two people. The winter eagle was awakened by the footsteps on the city wall. It looked into the distant sky warily. The footprints of the two people were clearly on the city wall. But it looked into the sky. On the endless city wall of Chang'an, the footprints of the two people appeared from time to time. No one could be seen. Only footprints could be seen. It was like the traces left by immortals in the human world. The footprints gradually reached the south gate. In the light snowflakes, a touch of indigo appeared. The Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey appeared outside the south gate. A Taoist sword was carried on his back. He had not slept for 7 days and he had traveled tens of thousands of miles between mountains and rivers, but he was still refreshed. Suddenly a wooden stick appeared in the snow. The wooden stick was very short. Very hard. The wooden stick hit the back of the Abbey Dean's head. The Abbey Dean waved his sword. The sword and the wooden stick met. There was a loud sound. The sound was melodious and loud. The sound was loud. Chang'an City woke up. The bell in the city rang loudly. Maybe it was because of the sound of the bell. Or because of the collision between the sword and the wooden stick. Or because of that person. The thin snow on the southern city wall, which was more than 10 miles long, rustled down. It revealed the black color of the city wall. There was a lot of snow under the city wall. Like a falling curtain, it piled up in one place. I like the last scene very much. It would be beautiful if it was made into a movie. Roll call. This chapter is almost over. I hope it can return to normal as soon as possible. Now you can scold me all you want. I also want to scold the days when it takes 6 hours to write a chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 777. The snow fell like a curtain and fell at the foot of the city wall, forming a snow line about half a man's height in front of the south gate. A scholar came and stood in front of the snow line silently. He was still wearing the old cotton-padded jacket, but now it was full of cuts made by swords. Hundreds of cotton flowers squeezed out of it and shivered in the snow wind. Some of the blood that he had shed over the past few days had been blown away by the wind between the mountains and rivers, but most of it had coagulated on the cotton that had bloomed, making it look extremely black and ugly. In addition, the wooden stick in his hand had many shallow sword marks on it, making him look like a beggar who had been chased by a vicious dog for many days. Although his appearance was a little disheveled, his expression was still calm, giving off a feeling of cleanliness from the inside out. Just like the slowly falling first snow. He looked at the Abbey Dean and said, "Chang'an is the last place the Academy chose?" The Abbey Dean looked at him and said, "I chose this place first." Eldest brother asked, "Why?" The Abbey Dean said, "Because this city can no longer stop me." Eldest brother asked, "Then why did you come so late?" "Because this city can't stop me until now." The Abbey Dean held the Taoist sword in his hand and looked at the magnificent city in front of him. He said, "The Academy is waiting and so am I. You are waiting for this city to recover and I am waiting for it to weaken." Eldest brother said, "It seems that you have waited for the result you wanted." The Abbey Dean said, "Don't be surprised about this result. I have prepared for many years to break this array. Since the headmaster left the human world, no one can change the course. No matter if we follow or not, we can't go against the will of heaven." He looked at eldest brother in front of the snow line and said, "This snow line can't stop me, and neither can the Academy. I will kill you and destroy the God-stunning array. Then everything will be over." After saying this he walked towards Chang'an. The road outside the south gate was covered with a shallow layer of snow. The Abbey Dean's right foot had just touched the ground, and he did not even leave a mark on the snow. He only took one step, or more precisely half a step. The Abbey Dean looked down at the ground. He was wearing cloth shoes. There was a small stone beside the cloth shoes. He looked at the stone and frowned slightly. Then he withdrew his right foot and returned to his original position. The Abbey Dean looked around and noticed that thousands of stones had appeared around the south gate of Chang'an City. The stones were of different sizes, sharp edges and round like eggs. However, no matter what shape the stone was, all of them gave off an extremely strong sense of stubbornness and injustice. The aura seemed so silent and unwilling, and it seemed as if it wanted to fill the entire world. That aura was so distinct, so silent, and so firm that the aura of heaven and earth in the south of Chang'an City was forcibly stuffed with countless obstacles, making it difficult to breathe. Because of the existence of these stones, the naturally existing dark passageways between heaven and earth became as difficult as breathing. In other words, there was no limitless in this world of stones. The first snow fell overnight. The thousands of stones in the south of Chang'an looked like soldiers in white armor, while the big stones were like the snowfield wolves in the north, full of killing intent. The Abbey Dean looked at the stones and suddenly laughed. He had been to the Daming Lake in the wilderness more than once, so he naturally knew about the stone array tactics. Using the stone array tactics to break the limitless state, the academy was really interesting. But why would he be afraid? He didn't step forward. He stood quietly among the stones, waiting for the academy's next move. Eldest brother took a step forward and disappeared in the light snow. The Abbey Dean knew that he didn't enter the limitless state, but the stone array tactics blocked the light and sight. In the rugged stone array they couldn't see each other, so he did nothing but wait quietly for the academy to attack him. The snow was still falling slowly and it was faint and beautiful. But when it was about to fall on the ground, it suddenly disappeared, and then fell dozens of feet away or even hundreds of feet away. It felt very strange. A thin piece of snow fell along the black city wall and fell on the Abbey Dean outside the city. Along with the snow, a short wooden stick also fell. The wooden stick broke the wind silently, and even the blocked aura between heaven and earth were not affected at all. It followed the natural flow of the wind and snow and arrived without a trace. The Abbey Dean's eyes slightly brightened. The wooden stick seemed simple and ordinary, but in his eyes, it was more amazing than the Great Blockage Formation. He just learned to fight a few days ago and now he could display such a state. When it came to learning speed, who in the world could be compared with him? The Abbey Dean raised his sword to face the wind and snow in front of him, thinking that if the headmaster of the academy had ascended to heaven 10 years later, with such a terrifying learning speed, he might not be able to suppress him like now. The Taoist sword broke the wind and snow, and then it hit the wooden stick in the seemingly empty falling snow. This was the second time that the sword and the stick met since they came to Chang'an. Different from the shocking scene of falling snow in the city when they first met, this time the sword and the stick met. It seemed so quiet and gentle, like the first snow falling into the lake about to melt. Thousands of stones in front of the south gate emitted a rugged and stiff aura. When the sword and the stick met, a very gentle aura instantly diluted the aura of the stone array tactics. The sword and the stick met in the air at a point and remained still. In the space of dozens of feet around that point, everything was still, whether it was the wind or the snow. The snowflakes stopped falling and stayed still in the air. The scene was extremely strange. Then the snowflakes broke, starting from the edge until the center of the snowflakes was broken into the finest powder. The powder-like snow fell down and sprinkled on the Abbey Dean and eldest brother. The eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket was torn again, and blood flowed out again. The wind and snow rose from the ground and blew around him, like a pair of invisible wings, pushing his wounded body back like flowing snow, out of the stone array tactics and into Chang'an. The Abbey Dean frowned slightly and was a little surprised. There was the stone array tactics in the south of the city. There was no distance in the eyes, but there was distance. This had a great impact on him and an even greater impact on the other party. But since the academy had found a way to break the limitless, there must be a follow-up method. So he let the powder snow fall on him and was ready for the academy's next move. However, the academy did nothing and directly retreated into Chang'an. In this case he had to enter Chang'an. To enter Chang'an he had to break through the rugged rocks in front of him. The Abbey Dean waved his sleeves, rolling up layers of snow like flowing clouds. Beside the state highway, a huge rock weighing tens of thousands of kilograms was lifted up by the wind of his sleeves, and fell far away in the field. He waved his sleeves again and another huge rock flew up. He walked toward the city gate. Along the way he rolled up his sleeves like clouds, and destroyed rocks and formations along the way. How to cast stone array tactics. When Kuhauren entered the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, he broke it with his sword. But he rolled it up with his sleeves. This did not mean that the current Aberdeen was stronger than Kuhauran. Most importantly, the Great Blockage Formation in the south of the city was far less powerful than the one at the bottom of the Daming Lake. As the leader of Taoism, he had a deep understanding of the Devil's Doctrine. He knew that the real stone array tactics must be a world made up of stubborn rocks. Although there were thousands of stubborn rocks in the south of the city, it was not a world. If it was not a complete world, there would be space. If there was space, there would be walking, and there would be more space. Outside the city, there was the sound of falling rocks. The wind and snow gradually stopped, and the indigo robe was approaching. On the city wall, Mo Shanshan's hair was covered with snowflakes, and her lips were bleeding. Her face was slightly pale. The Aberdeen waved his sleeves casually, and the stone array tactics was broken. Walking through the south gate, he entered Chang'an. There was no pedestrian on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. It was extremely quiet, and only the snow kept falling. The Aberdeen walked on the straight Vermilion Bird Avenue, looking relaxed. He looked at the buildings beside the avenue, the carvings in the middle of the street that were not completely covered by the snow, the black eaves and the old tiles covered with snow. He looked like an ordinary tourist. So Chang'an is like this? Many years ago, when he was still a child, he once came to Chang'an with the elders of his family. But it was too long ago and he had no specific memory of this city. Later he began to cultivate Taoism and never came to Chang'an again, because he became very powerful as soon as he began to cultivate Taoism. Without an invitation, Chang'an would not allow him to enter. More importantly, the headmaster of academy had always been in the academy in the south of Chang'an. What was unobtainable was the best. Whether it was cultivation, men and women or anything else, it was the same. So he liked Chang'an very much. Unfortunately, this city did not belong to him, so he had to destroy it. He had been thinking about this city for many years. He had been thinking about destroying this city for many years. Today he finally entered this city. He could not help but sigh. He looked up at the falling snow and said, "If you see this scene from the sky, will you regret leaving this world too early?" At this moment, cicadas suddenly chirped on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The snowflakes falling from the sky seemed to have a layer of brightness, and became thin cicada wings. It was winter and the first snow had arrived. Where did the cicadas come from? The Aberdeen slightly tilted his head and listened carefully. Finally, a serious look appeared in his eyes. After confirming that the stone array tactics could not stop him, he decisively gave up and let the academy retreat into Chang'an, using the power of the city itself. The person who could make such a decision was certainly not an ordinary person. He knew that there must be some interesting people waiting for him in Chang'an. But he did not expect that it would be so interesting. It turned out that this was the last confidence of the academy. There are cicadas in the west. They hide in the mud for 23 years and only wake up when the snow melts and floods come. They take a bath in the mud, dry their wings in the cold wind and fly out of the void. The Aberdeen looked at the wind and snow on the other side of the street and said calmly, "So you are here." The snow clouds thickened and covered the sky. The shrill chirping of cicadas resounded through Chang'an. A little girl walked out of the wind and snow. "I'm really not in good health. I need to ask for leave for the new year in February. So please vote for the more diligent writers. I will try to do it well after the meeting in early March. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 778. At the level of the Aberdeen, although he could not predict the future with a pinch of his fingers, he could predict the future with a slight movement of his mind. A normal sneak attack would be meaningless unless Ninkei was still holding the iron bow. Yulian did not hide her trace and just walked out of the wind and snow. "I can't communicate with Haotian in this city." She looked at the Aberdeen and said. Then she stretched out her hands in the air. She had reached the advanced level of the 23-year cicada cultivation. Her tender and beautiful little hands looked like two slightly bigger snowflakes in the wind and snow. With this movement, the snowflakes suddenly stopped and then continued to fall. However, they were no longer lightly floating. Instead, each snowflake began to shake violently and dance in the wind. The snowflakes vibrated at a high speed and made a low and dense sound, like countless cicadas flapping their wings at the same time. There was a yellow leaf on the eaves beside the street. It was swept into the snow by the wind and instantly torn into pieces. "I didn't expect that you have already reached the divine demon realm and become the first person in the Devil's Doctrine to break through the 5 states in 100 years. You should know that even Lotus could not break through the ordeal of heart and did not dare to take that step until his death. Linwu, you are indeed extraordinary. The Abbey Dean looked up at the sky and watched the falling snowflakes. He thought of that person and showed an expression of admiration. Anyone who could take the 23-year cicada cultivation as a disciple was worthy of admiration. Fortunately, it took me my whole life to finally make a crack in this city, he said with emotion, and then reached out his palm in the air. His palm was facing the sky as if he was going to receive the falling snowflakes. However, it was not snowflakes that fell but a majestic power. The thick snow clouds covered Chang'an City. The majestic power came from the sky, from the sun behind the clouds. When the inhuman power came to the human world, the God-stunning array reacted in the shortest time. Dozens of vigorous auras emerged from the streets and alleys of Chang'an City and poured into the snow clouds. However, the God-stunning array was damaged and the chi of heaven and earth on the Vermilion Bird Avenue slowed down. The majestic power fell on Chang'an City. The thick snow clouds in the sky were instantly torn apart, leaving a straight crack in the sky. Below the snow cloud crack was a perfectly straight long street. At this moment, standing on Vermilion Bird Avenue and looking up at the sky, one could see a magical scene. A crack had appeared in the middle of the snow clouds that covered the sky, and within the crack was the azure sky. Clear and beautiful sunlight shone down from the blue sky, illuminating the long street. The buildings and the snowflakes on the street were incomparably clear, even smeared with a layer of holy golden light. The snowflakes in the sky turned golden and melted at a speed visible to the naked eye. The sunlight seeping through the clouds and the majestic power were about to fall on the Abbey Dean. This was the power above the 5 states. This was the true divine art of Taoism, Tianqi. Yulian stood in the wind and snow, her black ponytail swaying gently. She felt that the snowflakes were a little cold. She had also surpassed the threshold of the 5 states. She had seen Xiong Chimo use Tianqi. But she did not think that there was someone in this world who could so easily use a technique above Realm 5, as if it was as simple as picking up a snowflake. She looked at the number 1 person of Haotian Taoism on the opposite side of the street and suddenly lowered her head. She looked at the snow in front of her shoes and began to write with her eyes. She wrote very attentively. The headmaster had asked her to write for many years, and what she wrote was her own world. When the first stroke appeared on the snow, her own world appeared on the snow street. The snowflakes danced wildly in the sky, their edges rubbing against the air at a high speed. The cicadas chirped louder and louder. Billions of snowflakes turned into transparent wings and flew rapidly, covering the sky above the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The clear light from the cracks in the clouds fell on the wing-like snowflakes and began to refract. There seemed to be countless golden leaves in the sky above Chang'an City. A very faint but powerful aura covered the entire snow street along with the dancing snowflakes. In the world of Haotian, a brand new world was created. Not a single snowflake fell, not a single ray of sunlight fell. The snowflakes stopped melting. The snow street became cold and quiet again. The clear shadow covered the Abbey Dean's body. The Abbey Dean looked at the little girl in the wind and snow quietly. It was not until this moment that he realized that her real state had reached such a level. He raised his right hand and pointed at her on the other side of the snow street. 4 fingers gradually bent. However, before he could point out with his index finger, a violent roar suddenly came from the wind and snow. It was the sound of some round object rubbing against the air at a high speed. An object came from the north of Chang'an City, spinning at a high speed, breaking the wind and shaking the snow. It was unstoppable. The Wanyan Pagoda was in the north of the city. It was a string of Buddha beads. It was Master Huangyang's Buddha beads. The Buddha beads spun at a high speed in the wind and snow. There were faint traces of blood on them, which should be the master's painstaking efforts. Many years ago, Huangyang was enlightened in the depths of the West Wilderness because of his companion's hot blood. So the string of Buddha beads stained with his painstaking efforts was also very hot. So hot that it was burning. An extremely merciful yet extremely violent fire attribute spat out towards the surrounding snow and wind as the prayer beads spun. Everything it touched was set ablaze. When the snowflakes touched the Buddha beads, they did not melt into water, but directly turned into nothingness. Master Huangyang was the Vedanta of the Buddhism sect and one of the few powerhouses in the world. The string of Buddha beads stained with his painstaking efforts was a great threat to the weakest Taoist heart of Taoism powerhouses. A line of fire appeared over the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The wind and snow suddenly stopped. It whistled through the air and then suddenly became quiet. The burning Buddha beads were put on the Abbey Dean's wrist. Yulian looked up. There were snowflakes falling deep in her childish eyes. Her academy uniform was fluttering. The aura of heaven and earth on the snow street trembled a little. Someone was about to appear. At this moment the Abbey Dean was cut off from Haotian by the cicada's world and restrained by Master Huang Yang's burning Buddha beads. There was no way for him to leave the snow street, even if he had no distance in his eyes. This was the Academy's arrangement. The next moment was the real attack. However, the Abbey Dean still looked calm. He looked at the string of Buddha beads on his wrist. The Buddha beads were burning, but even his green Taoist robe was not ignited. As his gaze fell, a thought flashed through his mind. The coldness of nirvana from ancient times followed his gaze and fell on the burning Buddha beads. The flame on the Buddha beads suddenly went out as if they had become a dead wooden ball. This was nirvana. Above the 5 states. In a flash, 2 states above the 5 states appeared on the snow street. They both came from the Abbey Dean. But he was still on the snow street, in the wind and snow in Yu Lian's world, unable to leave. A pair of footprints appeared on the snow hundreds of feet away. The snowflakes fell on the cotton jacket and then disappeared. It was the cotton jacket that disappeared in the wind and snow. The eldest brother made his move. The Abbey Dean slightly raised his eyebrows. His right hand, like a pine tree facing the wind, held the string of Buddha beads on his wrist and then disappeared. Half of the snow street was a small world. The cotton jacket and the green Taoist robe appeared and disappeared in the wind and snow, appearing everywhere. They suddenly appeared at the edge of the snow well on the North Street, and when they reappeared, they were next to the shops in the south. The Abbey Dean and the eldest brother were chasing on the snow street. They were chasing in the limitless state. In such a small area they were moving at a speed faster than thinking. It was just a moment, but it was more dangerous than the 6 days of chasing between mountains and rivers. The wind and snow rose again. Yulian's black ponytail swayed again. She looked calm and focused, and the snowflakes in her clear eyes were getting thicker. She activated the divine demon realm to the extreme. Countless snowflakes danced above the Vermilion Bird Avenue, and each snowflake was a cicada. The sky was full of snowflakes and cicadas. Countless horrible killing intents were on the snow street. This half of the snow street was her world. No matter how fast the Abbey Dean was, he could not be faster than the rules of the world itself. A snowflake fell slowly in front of the Deputy Yamen of the Clearwater Department of the Ministry of Revenue. There was nothing there. But when the snowflake fell there was a tearing sound. The Abbey Dean was forced out by the wind and snow. There was a sharp tear on the front of his green Taoist robe. On the top of the Wanyan Pagoda, Master Huang Yang sat cross-legged, chanting scriptures with his palms pressed together. Blood dripped in front of him like turbid tears. Under the stone pagoda, dozens of monks were kneeling in the snow, chanting scriptures as well. The string of Buddha beads on the Abbey Dean's right wrist was no longer burning. But it did not fall. The Buddha beads became extremely red, as beautiful as pomegranate seeds. There was a faint chanting in the wind and snow. The Buddha beads were shrinking. The stone steps in front of the yamen were covered with snow. The eldest brother appeared at the foot of the steps and hit the Abbey Dean's head with his cudgel. The Abbey Dean looked serious. He pulled out his sword and slashed. The eldest brother's feet sank into the snow. Blood oozed from the corner of his mouth. But he did not retreat. He waved his cudgel again. The Abbey Dean raised his sword and slashed again. It seemed simple but it was not. The sword and the cudgel were both waved in the distanceless state, which had gone beyond the concept of speed. In a very short time the sword and the cudgel had met countless times. The eldest brother's cotton-padded gown was covered with blood, and the cudgel had many shallow sword marks. The Abbey Dean looked more and more serious. At the other end of the snow street, Yulian suddenly took a step forward. The snowflakes fell on the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean waved his sleeves. The cicadas suddenly stopped chirping and the wind and snow dispersed. It was a mess. Not a single snowflake could fall on him. The Abbey Dean held his sword horizontally and retreated. Then he raised his palm to the sky. Countless majestic forces fell from the sky, from the cracks in the clouds, like lightning falling into the sky full of snowflakes, landing on the transparent world barrier. The snow street shook and the snow on the eaves fell like a waterfall. Yulian grunted and stopped in her tracks. The Abbey Dean threw the Taoist sword into the wind and snow. Then he appeared in front of the eldest brother and blocked the cudgel. He only used one thumb. The cudgel shook uneasily, and the aura of heaven and earth was in chaos. The eldest brother retreated to the other end of the snow street, coughing painfully while holding his chest. The Abbey Dean looked at his right wrist again. The red Buddha beads were still shrinking and were about to sink into his flesh. He frowned slightly as if he was unhappy. The wind and snow suddenly stopped. The Abbey Dean's body seemed to have become countless times bigger. In fact, he just stood in the wind and snow quietly. However, there was a vast and boundless aura that was as vast as the sea that instantly filled the entire space. The Buddha beads suddenly broke. Dozens of Buddha beads flew away in the air. Several round holes appeared on the gate of the Qingshui Bureau. Not far away, a wall collapsed and smoke rose slightly. The Buddha beads were very hot. Although they were not burning, they started fire when they touched wood. The wind and snow were still blowing and the fire was dying out. On the top of the Wanyan Tower, Master Huangyang held his chest in pain, and his palms were full of blood. He looked at the snow street in the south and said in a trembling voice, "It's immeasurable. The supreme skill of the Buddhism sect. Immeasurable. It was also above the 5 states. Tomorrow is Saturday off. I took the opportunity to go to the hospital for a checkup. I should have had a follow-up in the last 3 months last year, but I was too busy and forgot to finish a course of treatment. I am so irresponsible. I wish you all a happy weekend. I wish you all good health and be responsible for yourselves." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 779. There was a crack on the stone window of the Wanyan Pagoda, caused by a sword. Snowflakes drifted in through the broken window and fell on Master Huangyang's blood-stained kasaya. But the sword had disappeared. Yulian felt the sharp sword style coming back from behind. She frowned and waved her hand to sweep the snowflakes into the sky to resist the falling divine light of Tianqi. Then she finally took a step forward. She looked like a cute and ordinary little girl. But as she took a step forward, her aura suddenly changed greatly, as if she had turned into an army of thousands of men and horses. Her feet did not seem to be stepping on the shallow snow on the street, but on the vast wilderness. Her feet were like hammers and the earth was like a drum. The ground of southern city shook along with her footsteps. The wind and snow dissipated. Yulian broke through the wind and blew the snow away. In an instant, she took only one step forward and arrived in front of the Qingshui agency's yamen dozens of feet away. She punched at the Abbey Dean's face. Her fist was very small and looked as cute as cotton candy. But the Abbey Dean's expression suddenly became extremely serious, even more serious than when he saw Yulian display the divine demon realm, which was above the 5 states. Because Yulian was not only the 3rd sister of the academy, but also the grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine. Her fist represented the foundation of the Devil's Doctrine, which was power. As the most talented grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine in 1,000 years, Yulian in this state was undoubtedly qualified to be called a grandmaster of the generation. She was qualified to challenge powerhouses of any state. The Abbey Dean was very clear that the small fist that broke through the snow looked harmless and even a little weak. But if the fist landed on something, it could knock down a mountain. There was no wind when the palm was raised, but it was as soft as a thin snow falling into the lake. The Abbey Dean stretched out his right palm and blocked Yulian's fist. He was not knocked down by the small but terrifying fist, because he was not a mountain or a river. He was an ocean that could hold hundreds of rivers, and he was the air that filled the world. Looking at the palm in front of the fist and the Abbey Dean who was close to her, Yulian's childish face showed no emotion. She was extremely calm, which gave her a sense of enchantment. With a snap, the snow on the ground of the long street bounced off the ground. Countless cracks appeared on the hard bluestone ground, like a spider web. Yulian's right foot that fell behind stepped on the center of the spider web. The power that she had been accumulating for 23 years seemed endless. It gushed out from her petite body to the street. Her black ponytail was shaken loose and fluttered behind her like a whip, lashing the snowflakes miserably. Streams of energy were like sharp blades that carved deep marks on the wall. She did not use the heavenly demonic realm, nor did she create another small world. She did not use any mysterious methods. She only used her simplest and most reliable method to coldly throw it over. Dharma. She used it. Dharma. On the snowy street, there was only the whistling of power. In that instant, even the natural energy of the universe was forced to flee into the distance by the power of this petite body. Under such circumstances, the Abbey Dean could not enter the distanceless state even if she withdrew the small world. He could only face her fist and resist her power. She was the grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine. She seemed weak, but she had the most powerful power in the world. She believed that even the Abbey Dean could only run away from her power. Because no matter how much it looked like an ocean, it was not a real ocean. What could you do when you couldn't run away? On the street, the pure and absolute power roared. The Abbey Dean's Taoist bun was cut off. His long hair danced behind his green Taoist robe. He looked embarrassed. Yulian looked at him. She wanted to know the answer. She would know the answer soon. The Abbey Dean's hair fell in front of his eyes. His eyes were as calm as an ancient well. Then a snowflake floated in front of his eyes. It went through his eyelashes and his black pupils. The pure white snowflake seemed to enter his black pupils. The color of his black pupils gradually faded. Or the snowflake in his eyes became darker. It was gray. The Abbey Dean's eyes turned gray and misty. The deep well that was not afraid of wind and rain became a skeleton at the bottom of the well. The Abbey Dean's eyes became gray. Yulian felt her power draining away like the wind. Her face turned pale. At this moment, she thought of a certain rumor, and her eyes suddenly went cold while a strand of unrestrainable rage arose in her heart. She was not going to stop. After she entered the academy, the headmaster only taught her one thing. That was writing. Writing was a world of its own. It was also a way to purify one's mind and control one's anger. Because the headmaster knew that she liked to get angry, especially after she became a girl. So she had never been angry in the past 23 years. But she was very angry now. She had always hated the scumbags in Taoism. The Abbey Dean was undoubtedly the worst scumbag in Taoism. When he used the modified Enlightenment doctrine to deal with her, the Grandmaster of the Enlightenment doctrine, she was extremely angry. The Abbey Dean looked at her eyes quietly. His eyes were so gray, so calm and so dead. The snowflakes dancing on the street fell to the ground miserably as if they had lost the support of the airflow. They were like cicadas whose wings were torn off. If things went on like this, either the Abbey Dean would win with the gray eyes first, or Yulian would kill him before her power disappeared. The probability of the latter was about 20%. But Yulian's anger was suppressed by the headmaster for 23 years. Once it was ignited, it could start a prairie fire. So she wanted to bet on the 20%. More importantly, she was very clear that she could only have the 20% chance by following her heart's desire to fight for 23 years. Once she missed it, she did not know if she would have the chance again. There was one person who was not willing to bet on the 20% chance for Yulian, because he was the eldest brother. If he was in a desperate situation and had to gamble with his life, he thought he should be the one to do it. He could not let his junior sister do it. In the wind and snow, the old cotton-padded jacket appeared in front of Yulian. It also appeared in front of the Abbey Dean's gray eyes. The old cotton-padded jacket was stained with blood, but still clean. Just like the scholar in the cotton-padded jacket, who had traveled thousands of mountains and rivers and was covered with dust, but still clean. It was pure and clean. Without any color, it could not be dyed or stolen by you. The old cotton-padded jacket fluttered in the wind. The eldest brother's breath was calm and did not overflow. He raised the wooden stick in his hand. The Abbey Dean took a step back. The eldest brother picked up the wooden stick and knocked on the street covered with light snow. Every hit was a wooden fence. He was the first disciple of the headmaster of the academy. He knew the God-stunning array better than anyone else. As he knocked, he borrowed the aura of heaven and earth in Chang'an. After several hits, a thick city wall that had weathered thousands of years of wind and rain appeared on the snowy street. The Abbey Dean was on the other side of the city wall. He and Yulian were on the other side of the city wall. The Abbey Dean reached into the snowy sky and grabbed the Taoist sword that flew back from the Wanyan Tower. Then he raised the sword and stabbed at the city wall in front of him. His sword strike was similar to Yulian's punch earlier. It was extremely pure and extremely powerful. There was no power, only Taoism. The Taoist sword carried the sword Taoism that he had been immersed in for a lifetime. The city wall suddenly broke. A clear sword mark appeared on the wooden stick. The sword edge rolled over the wooden stick like the wind and snow, and stabbed into the eldest brother's left shoulder. The sword edge went into the cotton jacket for 3 inches and blood started to appear. Yulian reached out and grabbed the eldest brother's waist, like catching a cat. She was extremely powerful, so she was extremely fast. The sword edge moved forward. But it was gradually pulled out from the cotton jacket. Because her hand was faster than the Abbey Dean's sword. The eldest brother's straw sandals slid on the snow. He raised the stick and hit again. The Abbey Dean looked calm and raised the sword to stab again. Yulian whistled and the snow under the eaves collapsed. The roar that burst forth from her petite body was like a thunderclap that descended from the heavens. She withdrew all her power and then concentrated it on her right fist and punched forward. The wind and snow covered the gap of the God-stunning array like cicada wings, refracting the sunlight and emitting a golden luster, like countless golden leaves. At this moment, Yulian withdrew her aura, and her world naturally collapsed. The golden snowflakes above Chang'an burned violently, so beautiful that it made people's hearts palpitate. The snow was burning. The snow was finally melted and a crack appeared. The majestic power from the sky finally fell on the snowy street. A field of light, boundless light, covered everything. The three auras, with their own invincible power or the majestic chi of heaven and earth, collided together. The wind and snow roared, the walls and eaves were broken, and the houses along the street were all shaken into ruins. The wind and snow gradually calmed down. The eldest brother and Yu Lian had retreated to the north street hundreds of feet away. The eldest brother was covered in blood, especially the sword wound on his shoulder, which looked particularly terrible. Yu Lian was not injured, but her face was a little pale. All of a sudden rain started to fall. Both of their clothes were wet from the rain. It was winter and it snowed last night. But it rained in Chang'an today. The rain was very strange. Not only the time but also the pattern of the rain. The rain didn't fall anywhere else. Everywhere else in Chang'an was still snowing. Only the southern part of the Vermilion Bird Avenue was gradually soaked. Because the rain didn't come from the clouds but from the sky. The snow melted by the fire turned into water and fell down, wetting the long street. Yu Lian looked at the other end of the street, feeling that the winter rain was a little cold. The smoke and dust from the collapsed houses along the street was gradually suppressed by the rain. The figure of the Abbey Dean appeared again. He threw the hilt in his hand into the snow pile by the street. His Taoist sword was smashed by the eldest brother's wooden stick. But other than that he was not injured. His green robe was wet but it was not blood. The Abbey Dean walked on the shallow snow. He walked in the wind and rain. Every step he took left a footprint on the snow. The rainwater falling from the sky accumulated into an ocean in that footprint. The small ocean was very calm, reflecting the scene in the sky like a mirror. Above Chang'an the line of snow sky was still burning. Today is the New Year's Eve and the leader's birthday. Let's celebrate together. This scene is so beautiful. If I make a movie in the future, I must not delete this scene. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 780. The Abbey Dean entered Chang'an. Facing the powerhouses of the academy in Huangyang, he extinguished the fire of blood on the Buddha beads, waved his sleeves and broke the divine demon realm, waved his hand to summon the Tianqi, and broke the thousand-year city wall with a sword. The streets were filled with ruins, the snow in the sky was burning, and the raindrops kept falling. All of these scenes only proved one thing, and that was his strength. Cultivation in the human world was divided into 5 states. Crossing the highest threshold was the dream of countless people, but they could never reach the other shore. Over the years, few people in the cultivation world had passed the 5 states. Any one of them was already a legend or even a myth, such as the Tianqi state. However, today on the snowy street, the Abbey Dean waved his sleeves and performed the 4 legendary states, the Infinity, the Quietus, the Tianqi, and the Limitless state. And he did it so casually. The level the Abbey Dean showed was beyond the scope of the West Hill Classics and many other cultivation classics. It was beyond the most presumptuous imagination of cultivators. It even seemed unreal. The rain was still falling. He walked toward the north of the Vermilion Bird Avenue with a peaceful expression. The majestic power falling from the sky was injected into his body. With every step he took, he broke through the puddles of water and broke through the sunlight. His aura grew stronger. The cold rain slid down Yu Lian's face. She looked at the Abbey Dean who was walking in the rain and said, "It is said that 18 years ago, you came ashore and beat Wei Guangming down to the mortal world, removing him from the position of the divine priest of light." The Abbey Dean said, "That's right." Yu Lian said, "I didn't believe that you could beat a powerhouse of the Tianqi state back to his original state. Until now, I realize that you are more powerful than the legend says." The Abbey Dean walked slowly and said, "Being powerful is just a relative concept. I am stronger than you and Wei Guangming, but it doesn't mean I am powerful. Just like you are stronger than Xiong Chumo, it doesn't mean you are truly powerful." Yu Lian asked, "Then what is truly powerful?" The Abbey Dean said, "Turning the relative into the absolute. That is truly powerful." Yu Lian asked, "Being stronger than everyone else is truly powerful?" The Abbey Dean said, "Exactly. If you are invincible in the world, then you are naturally truly powerful." Yu Lian asked, "Do you think you are already invincible in the world? Crazy Ku is dead and the headmaster is gone." The Abbey Dean looked up at the raining sky and said, "I have no choice but to be invincible." When he answered this question, his mood was very calm and steady, so it seemed very natural, as if he was talking about whose dishes were the best. Yu Lian said, "Since you're invincible in the world, Why do you still want to cultivate the cultivation method of the Enlightenment sect? Abidine is the leader of Taoism, but you are the enemy of Taoism. Don't you feel ashamed? She was referring to the Abidine's eyes that turned gray when she punched. That was the gray eyes that were born out of the devil's great Tao Tai technique. The Abidine said, everything in the world belongs to Haotian. Furthermore, you should understand that the Enlightenment doctrine still worships Haotian. Why can't I use it? The burning snow in the sky of Chang and city was about to burn out. Therefore, the rain on the snowy street gradually lessened. The Abidine walked to a side alley. There was a well at the entrance of the alley. The snow on the edge of the well had luckily avoided the erosion of the rain. It looked white and fluffy, very beautiful. Only then did Yu Lian loosen her grip. She had been holding the cotton-padded jacket on eldest brother's waist. When she was talking to the Abidine, eldest brother did not participate, because he kept coughing and bleeding. His seriously injured body looked very weak. Yu Lian kept holding him because she knew that if she loosened her grip, eldest brother would forcibly enter the limitless state and continue fighting with the Abidine at the risk of his life. Now she loosened her grip because eldest brother had a moment to rest. More importantly, it was because the Abidine was close, and the battle between life and death was right in front of them. At this moment, a person suddenly climbed out of the ruined house by the street. It was a young man wearing a straw hat. He ran back from the West Hill, back to Chang'an, back to the academy. Thousands of miles of clouds, moon, dust, and soil had made him much thinner. He could no longer be described as chubby. He could only be described as burly. This was probably the description that a man should be. For many people, the Abidine of the Jisho Abbey was already a legendary figure. The rain and snow in Chang'an today proved that the Abidine was indeed a legend. But a legendary person was still a human being. The first words that came out of his mouth when he saw his only flesh and blood standing firm and unswerving in opposition to him were no different from those of the ordinary women in the stories. The Abidine said, "Why do I only have you as my son?" Chen Pippi lifted a fallen wooden beam in front of him and walked to the middle of the street. He knelt down and said in a trembling voice, "Father, but I am also a student of the academy." The Abidine looked at his son who was kneeling in the rain and said, "You are so weak. How can you choose a side?" Chen Pippi had been regarded as a genius of Haotian Taoism since he was a child. He was also the youngest cultivator to enter the knowing destiny state. But the three people on the street were all far stronger than him. The Abidine was right. He said, "I always want to try." The Abidine looked over Chen Pippi's head and fell on eldest brother who was covered in blood on the street. He said, "Is it worth it just to let your senior brother rest a little longer?" Chen Pippi said, "I just tried my best." The Abidine said, "The academy deserves your best, but Haotian Taoism doesn't?" Chen Pippi did not turn back to look at eldest brother and third sister. But he knew that eldest brother had gone through 7 days of the most arduous pursuit, fighting against a stronger opponent, and was already exhausted and heavily injured. His senior sister's current condition was not much better. After a moment of silence, he said, "Since I tried my best, I must start from my heart." He did not directly answer his father's question, but he had already answered it. It was his heart that allowed him to break the tactical array of the Jisho Abbey so that eldest brother could come and go easily. It was also his heart that allowed him to rush back from the West Hill and confront his father on the street. The Abidine's expression became calmer and calmer. He said, "I can give you no chance." Chen Pippi said, "Father, please give me one last chance. I have no other request." The Abidine said, "After trying your best, you will have no second thoughts?" Chen Pippi said, "Exactly." The Abidine said, "Very good." Chen Pippi stood up and wiped the rain and dirty water off his face. Then he slowly raised his arms. His fingers were slightly trembling. Because he was going to use the natural stream magical finger. Because his enemy was his father. Eldest brother wanted to stop the battle because he thought it was wrong to kill a father. Yu Lian only said one sentence to stop him: "If the academy is going to be destroyed, you must at least give Pippi a chance to try his best. Otherwise, how will he spend the rest of his life?" Chen Pippi used the academy's no-boundary intent to control the natural stream magical finger. The chi of the finger crisscrossed in the drizzle like a swallow returning to the woods. It was naughty and eager to go. It was pointing to the east, but the chi of heaven and earth condensed like a sharp blade, stabbing from the west. The finger was shaking like grass in the wind, but the finger intent was gentle and beautiful like a lotus leaf in the lake. The last time Chen Pippi used the natural stream magical finger was on a New Year's Day. That day, Sang Sang held the quilt and stood outside the back garden of the Chang'an local government. This was the second time he made a move in the truest sense. And it was also his most powerful attack. Facing the finger intent that broke through the rain, the Abbey Dean showed a gratified expression. This was what he had taught Chinpipi. He was very satisfied with the state and ability that Chinpipi had shown. So he was gratified and decided not to be too harsh on Chinpipi. He reached out his index finger and pointed at the air. He decided not to kill his son. A gust of wind, the sound of rain, the sound of flute, and the sound of drums were heard. The finger intent that crisscrossed in the street was instantly broken into countless pieces. Several muffled sounds were heard. Chinpipi fell into the rain, covered in blood. His limbs and joints were all injured by the finger intent. The bloody holes were ghastly and he looked extremely miserable. The Abbey Dean also used the natural stream magical finger. This was the real powerful natural stream magical finger. Chinpipi couldn't move. He sat in the rain like a man before his execution, crying loudly. He was crying very sadly. I am extremely tired. This chapter is only 2,500. Good night. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 781. The rain stopped. The snow in the sky had also been burned away, no longer falling. It was quiet on the street. Only the crying could be heard. Chinpipi was like a child who had been wronged, sitting on the ground and crying out loud. He was just a child before his father and his senior brothers and sisters. The reason why he cried so sadly was complicated. But his father and his senior brothers and sisters knew it. Because what else could he do under such circumstances but cry? The Abbey Dean walked past him with his hands behind his back. He did not look at him, nor did he show any expression. Eldest brother sighed and said, "It's good that you can cry. At least you won't be depressed." Yulian frowned slightly. She looked at the other end of the street and said, "We are not dead yet. The academy is not dead yet. Why are you crying?" The Abbey Dean was walking toward them slowly. The power from Hao Yin poured into his body and made him stronger. But Yulian was right. She and the eldest brother were not dead yet. As long as they were not dead, the battle on the snow street was not over. The academy would still exist. The academy had to keep the Abbey Dean on the street to protect the array pivot of the God-stunning array in Chang'an. Unfortunately, eldest brother was not good at fighting. He was good at other things. The clear light on the snow street fell on his simple and amiable face and his old cotton jacket full of blood, making him look like a teacher who had just slaughtered a pig in the countryside. In fact, he had always been a teacher at the back of the mountain of the academy. Whether it was zither, chess, calligraphy, arrays, or music, those junior brothers and sisters who had supreme statuses in their respective fields were all his disciples. Therefore, he had abilities in these fields that ordinary people could never hope to achieve. Looking at the Abbey Dean walking slowly, he was like a teacher who always used the chalk as a weapon when he encountered a difficult problem. He naturally thought of the things that he had been in contact with over the years. Eldest brother thought of something and the wind came from the north of the city. It rolled up the snow on the street and blew the ruins of houses and collapsed eaves on both sides of the street. It blew everything that could be seen. The tiles trembled and made a deep sound like a stone bell. A broken banner of a restaurant danced in the cold wind and made a hissing sound like a broken zither. The wind passed through the cracks of the broken walls and sobbed like a flute. These broken, sentimental and sorrowful voices combined to form a weeping and complaining song. The song was not melodious but full of sorrow. It came to the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean stopped and looked at the opposite side of the street. His expression turned solemn and he pointed. Eldest senior brother stretched out his hand towards the alleys beside the street and turned the countless streets and alleys in the south of the city into crisscrossing chess paths on the chessboard. He was the chess master beside the chessboard and instantly cut the finger intent into countless pieces. The Abbey Dean flicked his sleeves and messed up the crisscrossing chess Taoism. Then he stretched out his fingers. Eldest brother loosened his grip and threw the wooden stick onto the wet street in front of him. He didn't know Talisman Dao, so he didn't inherit the God-stunning array. However, he could use the chi of heaven and earth in this array. When the wooden stick fell, the 1,000-year-old city wall did not appear on the street again, only making a light paw sound. A soft sound came from the clouds above Vermilion Bird Avenue. Then there was a loud noise, countless loud noises. Countless bolts of lightning emerged from the clouds and struck down on the long street toward the Abbey Dean's body. These bolts of lightning were very dense and powerful. Even if the Abbey Dean entered the interlayer of the chi of heaven and earth with the limitless state, he couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't be hurt. The Abbey Dean's figure suddenly became faint. A bolt of lightning struck where he was standing just now. Smoke and dust filled the air and there was a faint smell of burning. But it struck nothing. Countless bolts of lightning struck down one after another. The Abbey Dean's figure appeared again and then disappeared. He was like a clear and indifferent cloud, drifting in the lightning and thunder. It was impossible to catch him. Yulian disappeared from where she was. Cicadas chirped again on the long street. It was the angry chirping of thousands of cicadas. The wind and snow rose again. The angry chirping of cicadas was hidden in it, like tigers fighting for their lives. The accumulated snow on dozens of streets all floated up and poured into the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The world on the street became a world of wind and snow. It was hard to see what was happening inside. Only the sound of the finger intent piercing through the air, the sound of lightning striking down, and the increasingly shrill chirping of cicadas could be heard. The wind and snow were like smoke and dust. The long street was a battlefield. No matter how powerful the lightning and the chirping of cicadas were, they still couldn't suppress the finger intent. One finger was as silent as the abyss. One finger was as boundless as the sea. The finger intent could guard everything in the world and restrain everything in the world. The lightning slowed down and the cicadas mourned. The long street full of natural horrifying power was like a courtyard for the Abbey Dean. He walked out leisurely. The wind and snow calmed down. The last piece of snow drifted past the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean lost 3 fingers on his left hand. Blood was dripping onto the street. He glanced at the broken fingers. The bleeding gradually stopped, and the severed finger was smooth and sparkling like jade. He took out a handkerchief and wiped the blood off his palm. Then he put it back into his chest pocket and looked across the street. Yulian reappeared on the street without anyone noticing. Her face was pale. Although there were no obvious wounds, she had suffered severe internal injuries. Eldest brother was covered in blood. He was so tired that he was about to collapse. The winner had been decided. The Jisho Abbey was the holy land of Haotian Taoism. The name of this Taoist abbey came from a mantra in the West Hill scriptures. Knowing its masculinity and keeping its femininity was called the natural stream. That was how Chin Pippi's natural stream magical finger got its name. From this, one could imagine the supreme status of this set of finger art in Taoism. In the mantra in the West Hill scriptures there were a few more sentences. Knowing its black and keeping its white was called the world style. Knowing its glory and keeping its shame was called the world valley. This was the world of Haotian. If one could know everything in the world, he could keep everything in the world. No matter it was power or conscience. That was the true meaning of knowing and keeping. The Abbey Dean's finger intent was not only the natural stream magical finger, but also the world style and the world valley. He had crossed the threshold many years ago. He had mastered all kinds of methods and learned Taoism, Buddhism and Diabolism. He was even more powerful than Lian Sheng and could be called the most powerful person in Taoism in the past 1,000 years. Unfortunately, he lived in the same era as the headmaster Kaharin, and those two people were rare. That was why he was forced to keep a low profile for so many years. Now there was no headmaster in the human world. There was no Kaharin. He was the highest peak and the most powerful person in the human world. He was invincible in the world. So his finger was the world finger. The wind and snow started again. But this time the wind and snow came from the heaven and earth and could not kill. Yulian looked at the Abbey Dean on the other side of the wind and snow and thought of what she had seen. She had mixed feelings. Eldest brother temporarily trapped the Abbey Dean with the sound of the broken house, the noise of the street and the power of the magnificent city. Then she used the angry cicada and was about to kill him, but the situation suddenly changed. The Abbey Dean looked at the wound of the broken finger and it looked like jade. She knew what was going on. This was the method of the devil's doctrine. Although it was not immortal, it was not far from it. If it was not so, her last piece of snow would have cut the Abbey Dean's body in half instead of only cutting off 3 of his fingers. She looked at the ordinary Taoist and thought of his ordinary name. She became serious. The leader of Taoism had cultivated the devil's doctrine to be more powerful than her, the headmaster. What kind of person was he? This is the world of Haotian. I follow the rules of Haotian, so all the rules of Haotian can be used by me. Unless you have the ability to challenge Haotian, you will never be able to defeat me. The Abbey Dean looked at the 2 people on the other side of the wind and snow and said calmly, "The 2 of you have brought me so much trouble. It is beyond my imagination. I even admire you. Li Man, if you were not so stupid to consume too much energy in these 7 days, and if you were not so stupid to not learn to fight for the first 10 years, maybe you could try to keep me here. Lin Wu, if you did not fight with Xiong Chumo a few days ago, maybe you could find some chance to kill me on the street today. But the possibility is still very small." The Abbey Dean looked at Yu Lian and said, "Since the traitor 1,000 years ago, you should be the most powerful headmaster of the Devil's Doctrine. You cultivated the 23-year cicada cultivation and integrated the divine demon realm, which helped you to create your own world. But it is a pity that your opponent is me. Just like how I was the most powerful person in Taoism for 1,000 years, but I met your master." The eldest brother said, "It was not until the Abbey Dean came to Chang and that I knew you had been waiting for time to pass. Because the God-stunning array could not be repaired, the power of the array was at its weakest. I should not have wasted these 7 days with you. But I have learned something during these 7 days." The Abbey Dean asked, "What is it?" The eldest brother said, "I can catch up with you now." The Abbey Dean said, "I was chasing you a few days ago. Now you are chasing me. What's the point?" The eldest brother said, "As long as I can catch up with you, we will have the chance to leave together." The Abbey Dean said, "I understand what you mean. But it is a pity that you are seriously injured now. It is difficult for you to catch up with me. And most importantly, you have no power." He looked at the senior brother and sister from the academy and said, "Now that I think about it, my admiration for the headmaster of the academy has deepened. He was able to teach you too. If you two were one person, I would not be a match for you. Fortunately for me, the two of you could not become one." Yu Lian said, "I want to see if I can exchange 2 lives for one of yours." The Abbey Dean said, "Even though you have cultivated the 23-year cicada cultivation and become a woman, and have studied under the headmaster for many years, you are still the headmaster of the Devil's Doctrine. It is ridiculous to say such impassioned words." Yu Lian said, "This has nothing to do with impassioned words. It is related to happiness. My master has always taught me that life is to find happiness and peace. If I can kill you, I will be very happy." The Abbey Dean said calmly, "That makes sense. So I will not give you such a chance." Even though he was invincible in the world, he did not want to fight with the 2 powerhouses of the academy when the outcome was already decided. Because there were countless possibilities before death. He came to Chang and not to kill but to destroy the array. As long as he could destroy the God-stunning array, the show would come to an end. In the wind and snow, cicadas suddenly chirped and then disappeared. The Abbey Dean's figure disappeared in the wind and snow. The God-stunning array was damaged, and the 2 from the academy were seriously injured. No one could stop him. Thank you for your understanding. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 782. Thank you to the reviews and comments section and friends everywhere for your medical answers. I have received all of them. I will take good care of myself. After the meeting at the end of the month and return to the Qing Kingdom, I will exercise with the leaders. I will live well and write for another 40 years. Please take care of me these days." The Abbey Dean's figure disappeared in the wind and snow. Eldest brother swayed slightly as if he was about to fall and walk. More blood seeped out of his old cotton gown. At this moment, Yu Lian reached out and hooked his belt around his waist. She shook her head. "He's right." Yu Lian said, "Even if you try your best to catch up with him, I can't. It's still meaningless. Even if you want to leave Chang'an with him, you can't." Eldest brother said tiredly, "Then what should we do?" Yu Lian said, "Since we can't catch up with him, we can only wait for him to be stopped." Eldest brother said, "Who can stop the Abbey Dean now?" Yu Lian said, "Chang'an." Eldest brother looked at the crack in the clouds above Vermilion Bird Avenue and said, "The city has been broken. It's just a crack." Yu Lian said, "When the crack is sewn up, we can come together." Eldest brother said, "It's not appropriate to let youngest brother bear such heavy pressure." Yu Lian said, "Although he's still very weak now, the city belongs to him since master has given it to him. That's the pressure he should bear." Eldest brother said, "Then we wait?" Rest. Yu Lian loosened eldest brother's belt and held his arm, helping him walk to the side of the street. Chen Pippi squatted on the rubble by the street, his eyes red and swollen like rotten peaches on the West Hill. Yu Lian said, "Come and help him." Chen Pippi quickly wiped the tears off his face and came to help. There were ruins on both sides of the street. There was a sturdy silver building, only half of which had collapsed, with some broken eaves that could shelter them from the snow and rain. The 3 sat under the eaves waiting for the final outcome. The chirping of cicadas in winter gradually quieted down. The snow rose again in the morning and danced with the wind. The dry snowflakes fell on the street and were blown by the cold wind. There seemed to be countless salt crystals rolling on the straight Vermilion Bird Avenue. In the wind and snow, the Abbey Dean's figure was as small as a flying swan, or as inconspicuous as a snowflake. However, Chang'an was, after all, the god-stunning array left by the headmaster, so he was soon found. Countless houses in the 365 streets and alleys in the eastern city, as well as countless bricks and stones, all sensed the arrival of the Abbey Dean. An ancient aura emanated from the cracks of the bricks and the moss and snow. The 5 lakes in the western part of the city had also sensed the arrival of enemies in Chang'an. The surface of the lakes that were covered with ice and snow began to shake slightly, and hot springs began to gush out from the rocks in the depths of the lakes. When the thin snow fell on the city wall of Chang'an, the magnificent city sensed the arrival of the enemy. This was the most powerful enemy it had encountered in the past 1,000 years. Countless auras rose from the imperial palace, from the government offices, from the residences, from the lakes, mountains, wells, and trees. The aura of heaven and earth above the grand city suddenly underwent an extremely violent change. The low and heavy snow clouds rolled restlessly, instantly covering the crack in the clouds above the Vermilion Bird Avenue, perfectly blocking the majestic power cast down from the sky. The Abbey Dean looked up at the sky and confirmed that the Chang'an was blocked again. Then he looked around Chang'an and sensed the terrible power contained in those auras. But he still looked calm and continued to walk north. Because he was walking on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, walking on the damaged part of the city. The snow on the Vermilion Bird Avenue had been blown to the sides and piled up into knee-high piles. It looked like the 1,000-mile city wall of the Yen Kingdom against the eastern wilderness. The Vermilion Bird in the middle of the street was very clear. The Abbey Dean walked past the Vermilion Bird. The Vermilion Bird suddenly opened its eyes. They were lively and violent, as if it was about to become a living creature. The Abbey Dean turned to the Vermilion Bird and said, "Evil creature." In the eyes of the Vermilion Bird, there was a struggling emotion, but it turned dark because of fear. The Vermilion Bird was a killing talisman in the god-stunning array. Its power was equal to a full blow from a cultivator at the peak of the knowing destiny state. Even cultivators who had passed the threshold of the 5 states and Lubai would be afraid of it. But the Abbey Dean just said one sentence indifferently. The Vermilion Bird turned dark. The array in Chang'an was like an iron curtain that had covered the sky in the human world for 1,000 years. Even though the Abbey Dean was the most powerful cultivator in Haotian Taoism in the past 1,000 years, he could not tear the iron curtain with his own power. However, as long as one had enough time, one would be able to accumulate enough power. The Tao sect used 1,000 years and finally tore a hole in this iron curtain. The Abbey Dean continued to walk like an immortal. The doors of the houses along the street were closed. Some people looked at the street through the cracks of the doors. They looked at the Taoist in indigo who looked like an immortal, and their eyes were full of fear and despair. Since the early morning, the bells in Chang'an had been ringing and the snow was burning. Everyone in the city knew what was happening. But in the face of a battle that was beyond the 5 states, secular power was meaningless. He approached the north city. The side of the street suddenly opened up. A large meadow covered with thin snow added a sense of tranquility to the dozens of small buildings and the winter forest. It was the military ministry of the Tang Empire. If it was a normal war, the military ministry of the Tang Empire behind the snow-covered meadow would definitely be the place that the enemy wanted to destroy the most. But the Abbey Dean did not even look at it. He looked at the buildings in the north quietly. That majestic and magnificent imperial city. His destination was the small building in the imperial palace. He wanted to destroy the god-stunning array under the small building. He was the only one who could do it. The Abbey Dean started to walk forward. Suddenly, his footsteps returned to their original position. He looked at the wind and snow in front of him and slightly raised his eyebrows. The wind and snow suddenly rose and then gradually condensed into 2 traces. The Abbey Dean's expression gradually became serious. The 2 traces condensed by the wind and snow were very strange. They were suspended in the air, neither dispersing nor falling. It was like someone had written 2 strokes in the air. It was not ink but snow. Ning Ke had already woken up after meditating for a night by the Yanming Lake. When he woke up, his clothes and the lake and mountains around him had been covered by the first snow. It was a vast expanse of whiteness. He stood up. The snow rustled down. He stood by the cliff and looked at the snow lake. He held the array pestle in his hand. He looked at the snow lake and then at Chang'an City. He saw the snow falling like a curtain in the south of Chang'an City. He saw the snowflakes burning in the sky like fire. He saw the street in the winter rain. He saw the Taoist in indigo floating like an immortal and arriving at the imperial city in a moment. He suddenly reached his hand behind his shoulder and pulled out the cold hilt of his padao. Then he chopped down. The padao chopped down casually. There were 2 swishing sounds. Two clear marks appeared on the snow lake. The next moment, the two marks disappeared from the snow lake. He fled between the heavens and earth, his whereabouts unknown. The two marks he made on the snow lake came to the Vermilion Bird Avenue. They came to the front of the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean looked serious. He stopped. Two marks, one stroke and the other stroke. They formed a simple and sharp word. It was E. It looked like the cross of a sword and a knife. It meant that the grass was cut silently. And there was a meaning that even a child could understand. This road is blocked. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 783. The Abbey Dean stared at the two marks formed by the wind and snow on the street in front of him. The cold wind blew gently, and the snow attached to the two marks peeled off and flew away, leaving only the marks. These two marks were transparent and formless, but they had their own sharpness like two knives. The two marks spread to the side of the street and covered the entire Vermilion Bird Avenue. The meadows and woods felt it and fell down as if to show their submission and fear. Ning-Ke was riding by the lake. The chi of heaven and earth in Chang and condensed into two invisible marks. They cut the heaven and earth like knives and blocked the snowy street like fences. The two marks did not stay still. They moved to the south slowly. The trees on the side of the street collapsed and the snow was blown away. The black ground was exposed and deep gullies appeared on the ground. This was the power of the divine talisman and the God-stunning array. The two marks appeared on the Vermilion Bird Avenue and blocked the gap of the God-stunning array, mending the crack on the iron curtain. The Abbey Dean could not deal with the word floating in the snow, even if he was in the distanceless state. The two marks could cut the heaven and earth and the interlayer of the chi of heaven and earth. Therefore the Abbey Dean chose to retreat. He retreated thousands of feet. In a moment, he flew from the north of the city to the middle of the Vermilion Bird Avenue and to the front of the Vermilion Bird. The Vermilion Bird suddenly opened its bright eyes. The lines of wings carved on the stone ground trembled violently, as if it was about to fly, like an eager fledgling. Being eager is stupid after all. The Abbey Dean's right foot landed on the Vermilion Bird's wing. The air on the street was messy and the snow and dust were scattered. With a whine, the Vermilion Bird stopped flying. The Abbey Dean looked up at the other end of the street and squinted. The street was silent. No one was in sight. The simple word came slowly in the wind and snow. A piece of snow fell on Ning-Ke's hand and melted into water. It flowed down and wet his sleeve. It was not because of his high body temperature, but because the array pestle in his hand was slightly heating up. He held the array pestle and looked at the lake in front of him. He could see Chang'an and sense every street and every change of the chi of heaven and earth in the city. The word had flown away, but it was still in his mind. He clearly saw the word appear on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, subdued the winter forest, and forced the arrogant Abbey Dean to retreat. Emo Shanshan came down from the city wall and came to the Yanming Lake. She stood quietly behind him. Her white cotton dress was stained with blood. She was hurt when the Abbey Dean broke the stone array tactics. She did not see the two knife marks, but as a talented divine talisman master, she could feel the talisman aura on the snow lake. At this moment, she remembered the two sword marks on the moss-covered stones at the bottom of Daming Lake with Ning Quebec. She was so excited that her eyelashes fluttered. The stone array tactics in front of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine had been broken by Mr. Ku with two sword scars. The two slashes that Ning-Ke had made earlier were very similar to the two sword scars, but in fact they were completely different. Ning-Ke slashed at the snowy sky. He was not using his blade to cut off all the obstacles in front of him, but to write words with his blade. He and Mo Shanshan were now divine talisman masters, so the words he wrote were divine talismans. He only knew one talisman, the Tuk talisman. The academy had been waiting for the Abbey Dean in Chang'an for 7 days, so he had been thinking hard for 7 days. Last night when it was snowing, he had written countless words on the snow. Finally, he had learned another word in the morning. That word was also very simple, like a transformation of two characters. Two horizontal lines separated and scattered, and then casually put together like firewood to form a brand new word. The shape of this word was different from the sword mark left by youngest uncle on the stone at the bottom of Daming Lake. In contrast, it was more direct and tougher. Ning-Ke did not know if it was the word he had been looking for, or if it was the word his master Yensei had been looking for all his life. But he liked it, because it was called E. It meant to govern, stabilize and cut grass. The word looked like a cross. If it appeared on the academy's test paper, it meant a mistake. If it appeared on a road sign, it meant that no one was allowed to pass. The word was very suitable for the Abbey Dean, who was walking like an immortal in Chang'an. Because Ning Ke wanted to stabilize the city. He wanted to stop the Abbey Dean from passing. He even wanted to cut off his enemy's head like cutting grass. The most suitable was the best. When the talisman of Yin floated up from the bottom of the Black Ocean in Ning Ke's mind, he even thought that he had been blessed by his master from heaven. A divine talisman was not enough to resist the invincible Abbey Dean. Otherwise, the vermilion bird would not have cried. But Ning Ke now had the entire Chang'an. He could mobilize almost infinite chi of heaven and earth. This meant that he could cut out a divine talisman with his blade. As long as his arm was not numb, he could cut out countless divine talismans. Those divine talismans were like countless needles and threads. They sewed up the crack of the God-stunning array and blocked the Abbey Dean on the snow street. They might even trap him in the divine talismans. Ning Ke suddenly walked into the snow lake. In his perception, the Abbey Dean was the most dazzling light. But at this moment, the light had disappeared. He did not know where it had gone. He had the God-stunning array and could observe everything in Chang'an accurately. Through the battle in the morning, he was sure that the Abbey Dean could enter the limitless state in Chang'an and then teleport within a specific range. But he could not directly use the limitless state to pass through the entire Chang'an. Chang'an, which was left to the human world by the headmaster of the academy, had been torn apart by Haotian Taoism after 1,000 years. But the use of the chi of heaven and earth was still beyond the scope of the human world. If the Abbey Dean used the limitless state to teleport a long distance in the array, he would risk being torn apart by the turbulence of the chi of heaven and earth. Ning Ke believed in his master in the city. So he was sure that the Abbey Dean could not really disappear. The Abbey Dean should still be around the Vermilion Bird Avenue, looking for a loophole in the God-stunning array. He thought of a possibility. If his talisman of Yin was a needle and thread that could mend Chang'an, then it would leave needle holes. Ordinary cultivators could not see these needle holes, let alone use them. But the Abbey Dean was not an ordinary person. The Abbey Dean was a painter who could draw in the needle holes. So he walked into the snow lake to get closer to the Vermilion Bird Avenue. He had to continue writing talismans and sewing them tightly to keep the Abbey Dean where he was. But there was a problem. Ning Ke stopped and turned to look at Mo Shanshan. He asked, "Where should we cut next? Or where should we write the next character?" This was a very important question. It was ridiculous that he could not even figure this out at such a critical moment. Mo Shanshan did not laugh. She held the other end of the array eye pestle that Ning Ke handed over. Feeling the warmth from her palm, a completely different world appeared in front of her. It was the God-stunning array and also Chang'an. It was not the real Chang'an. Or rather, this was the real Chang'an. Mo Shanshan took out her glasses and put them on the bridge of her nose. She looked at the snow lake and the Chang'an in front of her. After thinking for a while, she said tentatively, "I think it should be here." She pointed to a lotus on the snow lake. "Although it is not much, I am still writing, which means I am still alive. It will not be like this in March. I will definitely write more in April. Of course, all this is based on the premise that I am fine." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 784. Mo Shanshan's lips were very red and thin. When they were pressed together, they looked like the rouge paper in a girl's boudoir. Her thin and long eyelashes trembled slightly in the cold wind of the lake. There was a thin layer of frost on their surface. When she put on her glasses and covered her eyes, the frost gradually melted like the light and shadow in her eyes. The round glasses and her soft and round face made her look very cute and interesting. Her eyes fell on the snow lake and saw a broken lotus. She pointed at it. The broken lotus was a small alley in the city. Behind the alley was a small pond and a market. The market sold all kinds of groceries and was named Lotus Pond. She was very talented in tactical arrays. These days she learned about the God-stunning array from Ning Quebec. At this time, holding the array eye pestle, she could see Chang'an City clearly. That broken lotus. Maybe it was a guess. But Ning Ke was willing to believe it. He looked at her beautiful face and the cute glasses and remembered that he gave them to her at Lang Temple. But he also remembered that Sang Sang was sitting in the carriage at that time. He held the padao and slashed forward. Two sharp knife lights cut the reflection in the glasses, cut the untraceable memories, cut the wind and snow, and cut the broken lotus. The market at Lotus Pond sold groceries or cheap goods. It was not far from Vermilion Bird Avenue. In the past, it was noisy and the peddlers' shouts started in the early morning. Today, because of the imperial court's strict order, and because an immortal had entered Chang'an City, everyone stayed in their homes. So the market was very quiet and no one could be seen. Suddenly there was a gap in the eaves of a house in the market. With a cracking sound, broken tiles fell and smashed the snow on the ground. But the house did not collapse. There was also a very straight gap in the wall of the warehouse about 200 feet away. The sheepskin stored inside flowed out like organs and piled up on the ground. There was nothing in the air above the market, but the falling snowflakes moved away in all directions. It was as if there was an invisible existence there that prevented anything from entering that area. 2 dark and bottomless holes appeared on the snow-covered ground, which seemed to lead to the abyss. The 2 knife marks came from the Yanming Lake. With the power of the God-stunning array, they reached the lotus pond in a flash. The saber mark was invisible to the naked eye, but the power of the saber mark was clearly displayed through the destruction of the market square. That character, that talisman, could not be seen in the market. The snowflakes drifted down and then dispersed. The eaves had collapsed and there was a hole in the ground. If someone were to look from afar, they would be able to clearly see the 2 exaggerated crisscrossing knife marks in the word E. A soft but clear sound rang out in the wind and snow. It was the sound of clothes being torn apart. A piece of green cloth slowly floated down from the sky and landed on the ground. The Abbey Dean showed himself and looked into the distance with an indifferent expression. No one knew what he was thinking. His green Taoist robe was fluttering in the snowy wind. The front part of his robe was missing. In the next moment he stepped into the snowstorm again and disappeared without a trace. Ning Kai and Mo Shanshan had already walked across the snow lake and arrived at the north bank of the lake. The 2 of them held the 2 ends of the array pestle, looking like playmates who did not want to be separated. An unhealthy blush appeared on Mo Shanshan's white face. Then she coughed and pointed to the weeping willow by the lake. It was cold in winter, and the green willow catkins in summer had long dried up. They hung weakly in the cold wind and looked particularly decayed, like a frozen snake. Ning Kai wielded his knife again. 2 knife marks cut the weeping willow by the shore into pieces. Then he tore through the wind and snow and escaped into the world, heading to another place in Chang'an. It was a side alley beside the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The alley was very ordinary, no different from the thousands of narrow alleys in the city. There was a common well at the entrance of the alley. The edge of the well was covered with fluffy snow, like a snow-ring dessert. 2 knife marks came to the entrance of the alley. The talisman of Yin extended around with the help of the whole city. The accumulated snow on the edge of the well suddenly left the bluestone and floated in the air. It looked very strange, but in the eyes of innocent children, it was more like a dessert. With a light snap, the snow ring suddenly broke in the middle and became a straight snow rope. The rope made of snow blocked the entrance of the alley. The narrow alley was quiet and the falling snow was silent. Only when the wind came out of the alley could it be heard occasionally. A foot appeared in the wind and snow. The foot was wearing a cyan cloth shoe. The foot stepped on the snow rope and kicked out. It was a very simple kick, but it seemed to kick down Min Mountain. It was easy to hang upside down. The snow rope collapsed and broke into pieces. The Abbey Dean used the recoil force to float back and avoid the 2 knife marks. The wind and snow fell lightly. His feet landed deep in the alley. He finally raised his eyebrows. Mo Shanshan followed Ning Kai into the courtyard on the north bank of Yanming Lake. This was the first time she walked into Ning Kai's house. Ning Kai's mood changed and he became more silent. He walked along the old path of the plum garden, past the flower hall and came to the front room. He saw many old things and remembered many old things. Then he looked up at the slightly deformed beam with an inexplicable expression. Back then Chen Pipi saw Yi Hongyu jump into the air and hit the beam of the room hard. Later when Xiaoho came here the beam suffered a great deal of torture. But the beam still supported the house and did not collapse. Don't tell me you want to cut it here. I really don't want to. He looked at the beam and said. Mo Shanshan looked out of the hall. There was a pot of wintersweet there. It was especially lush and wild because no one had trimmed it. She asked, how about cutting it here? Ning Kai said with a smile, Yi Hongyu likes these plum blossoms. Sang sang and I don't care. After saying this, he waved his knife and cut the wild plum blossoms into countless pieces. A moment later, the pile of firewood in the backyard of a mansion in Chang'an City became an indestructible fence. A cyan robe was almost trapped by the fence and then cut into pieces like the plum blossoms. Ning Kai and Mo Shanshan walked all the way, cutting all the way. Cutting the knife meant writing and writing talismans. He cut out countless divine talismans with his padao to replace the damaged array intent along the Vermilion Bird Avenue. He also borrowed the endless aura of heaven and earth in Chang and city to block the Abbey Dean outside the palace. The three from the academy sat beside the ruins of the southern part of the Vermilion Bird Avenue. They felt the changes in Chang'an City and the sharp talisman intent that appeared and disappeared in the side alley of the marketplace. They had complicated emotions on their faces. Youngest brother had not fixed the God-stunning array yet. But this replacement method was enough. The problem was that it was not enough for the academy and the Tang Empire. No matter what happens today, I will return to Haotian Taoism, Qin Pipi said with his head lowered. Eldest brother and Yu Lian understood what he meant and did not express any opinions. The two stood up and looked at each other calmly. Then they walked to somewhere side by side. Since it was not enough, they had to go. Even if Ning Ke could block the Abbey Dean with the help of the God-stunning array, or even force the Abbey Dean out of Chang'an City, it would be meaningless. If they could not kill or seriously injure the Abbey Dean today, the academy would be the loser. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 785. The big tactical array in Chang'an was different from other arrays in the world. It was connected to heaven and earth. No matter how serious and seemingly irreversible the damage was, it could repair itself as long as there was enough time. It was for this reason that the Academy wanted to trap the invincible Abbey Dean in Chang'an. The Abbey Dean's purpose of entering Chang'an was clear. He wanted to destroy the city. There was only one way for the Abbey Dean to destroy Chang'an. He could only follow the crack in the God-stunning array. It looked like he was following the Vermilion Bird Avenue, but he actually stepped on the dim spots in the God-stunning array and entered the palace and the small building. However, there were countless knife marks on the road. The God-stunning array mobilized the chi of heaven and earth in Chang'an, and then followed the power of nature to force him out of the limitless state. Those knife marks were words telling the Abbey Dean that the road was blocked. From the marketplace to the alley, the wind and snow were raging. The Abbey Dean's mind was as cold as his indigo gown. He was sure that he could not enter the palace before he got rid of the divine talismans. There was a direct and simple way to solve the dilemma, and that was to kill Ning Ke, who had used the divine talismans. So the Abbey Dean rode the wind and headed for Yanming Lake. Eldest brother sensed the indigo gown fluttering restlessly in the narrow alley. He knew where he was going with the limitless state. His heart became as heavy as his footsteps after he was injured. Using the limitless state in such a small area was like embroidery in the eye of a needle and flying in a world of sand. Even if he was not injured, he could not catch up with the Abbey Dean. Even so, he still wanted to catch up, because he could not let his youngest brother face the Abbey Dean alone. So he stepped on the snow, leaving a puddle of blood, and his cotton gown trembled. However, he did not enter the limitless state, because Yu Lian's hand fell on his waist again and grabbed his belt. The Abbey Dean is going to kill his youngest brother. Eldest brother looked into her eyes. Yes, this is what he must do now. Yu Lian answered calmly and did not say anything else. The Abbey Dean appeared on the snow bridge by Yanming Lake. He was far away from the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The God-stunning array was horrifying. The wind and snow seemed normal but contained infinite power. There was no peaceful laminar flow of the chi of heaven and earth. No one could enter the limitless state in such an environment. The Abbey Dean walked down the snow bridge, crossed the winter reeds and walked to the Yanming Mountain on the south bank of the snow lake. He climbed the mountain in the snow and came to the edge of the cliff. However, he did not see anyone. There were many messy marks on the snow. There were footprints and sitting marks, but most of them were scribbled handwriting. Some words were written with fingers, while others were written with withered branches. The Abbey Dean looked at the handwriting on the snow and understood what had happened here last night. But where was Ning Ke, who had written these words last night and comprehended that word now? He looked at the surface of the lake, at the two clear footprints on the surface of the lake, the broken lotus, the broken willow branch, and the broken wintersweet. His eyebrows slowly rose. There was no trace of Ning Ke in his sense of perception and vision. This was against common sense because even with the help of the God-stunning array, it was impossible for him to completely avoid Haotian's sight. Someone was helping him hide his aura. It was probably the owner of the other footprint on the lake. A few small round stones fell on the street, smashing holes in the snow. They rolled all the way forward and hit the stone steps on the side of the street, making a crisp sound before slowly coming to a stop. Those stones were only the size of a fingernail. A deerskin bag could contain a lot of them. If they were used sparingly, they could cover the whole Chang'an city. Of course, this was an exaggeration. A faint aura overflowed from those small stones and melded with the tiles and stones around the street. Suddenly, it felt like the Great Blockage Formation in front of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. However, those stones were very round and had no edges or corners, which was interesting, different from the Great Blockage Formation. They did not blindly fill the sky and the earth, but rather covered everything gently. Ning Kai and Emo Shanshan walked through these small stones. They had already left the Yanming Lake, passed the closed bun shop, and arrived at the South City. I'm afraid that even the great divine priest of light who created the Great Blockage Formation did not expect that a genius girl of Talisman Taoism could come up with new ideas and transform the Great Blockage Formation into this, Ning Kai said with a smile. There was no smile on Emo Shanshan's face, only worry. What should we do next? Ning Kai said, the current situation seems complicated, but it is actually very simple. With the Abbey Dean's wisdom, I'm afraid that he has already figured out a way to break the situation. Now he is coming to kill me. Emo Shanshan said, the Abbey Dean can also leave Chang'an City? Ning Kai said, the Academy does not want him to leave unscathed. An invincible powerhouse outside Chang'an City represents the failure of the Academy and the Tang Empire. Fortunately or unfortunately, the Abbey Dean himself does not want to leave Chang'an City, because this is the best opportunity for him. Emo Shanshan looked at the tip of the shoes that kicked out the hem of her cotton skirt from time to time. She wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Ning Kai knew what she was thinking and said, eldest brother naturally wants to save me, but third sister will definitely not let him come because it is meaningless. Emo Shanshan looked up at him and was somewhat puzzled. Unless I can trap the Abbey Dean with the God-stunning array, or find a way to choose the Abbey Dean from the world of Haotian, third sister will not do anything. I won't blame third sister because if it were me I would do the same. The Academy only has one chance, so we must cherish it. Ning Kai said, now I have to hide myself first, and then find the places where his footsteps fall. I hope I can trap him to death. Let's see who can be faster. Emo Shanshan did not say anything more. She stretched out her index finger and pushed up her glasses. Looking at a quiet alley in front of her, she said, write it here. Ning Kai looked at the alley and raised his knife again. The knife mark disappeared with the wind and snow, leaving no trace, just like the flash of complex emotions on his face. There used to be 2 mansions in this alley, one for civil affairs and the other for military affairs. One was the official of council's mansion, and the other was the Xianwei general's mansion. One was his and the other was hers. In a mansion, an old house covered with cobwebs and dust collapsed. Ning Kai heard the sound of the house collapsing, but he did not look in that direction. He continued to walk forward with his knife in hand. Emo Shanshan followed beside him, throwing stones on the street. From Yanming Lake to Southern City and then to Eastern City, the two fell and threw stones along the way, avoiding the Abbey Dean's eyes and looking for a way to trap the Abbey Dean to death. The second floor of the building of pines and cranes collapsed, and the plaque of Chenjinji Cosmetics store was broken. Ning Kai no longer needed Emo Shanshan to point out the direction. He held one end of the array eye pestle and sensed the indigo robe floating in Chang'an City. He recalled the black umbrella that passed through Chang'an City years ago and kept chopping. Finally, he returned to the familiar Lin 47th Street. He pushed open the closed wooden door of the old brush pen shop, looked at the long-lost calligraphy on the wall and walked to the backyard. He took out his padao and chopped. A shrill cat's cry came from the wall, and the snow was kicked everywhere by the cat's feet. The well in the small courtyard broke and the wall collapsed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 786. Aunt Wu's shouts and Boss Wu's scolding came from next door. Ning Kai looked at the broken well in front of him and smiled inexplicably. He turned around and left the old brush pen shop with Emo Shanshan. They walked back to Lin 47th Street and headed for the next place. He and Emo Shanshan walked in the streets like tourists who came from afar to appreciate Chang'an. They looked calm, but they knew that the current situation was very dangerous. The Abbey Dean still had the initiative. When the Abbey Dean felt that the God-stunning array could threaten him, he could easily retreat. But Ning Kai could only wait passively. He avoided the Abbey Dean's gaze in Chang'an. He felt that the Abbey Dean was getting closer and closer. He needed help. Fortunately, there were many people along the way. Chang'an was very quiet in the morning. Few houses had smoke and no one went out to sell hot and sour sliced noodle soup. Everyone was vigilant and uneasy at home. It was like a calm sea. But it was still a sea. Ning Ke walked in the sea and hid his position with the help of the aura of the sea. The Abbey Dean's figure appeared again. He looked at the wind and snow. His Saiyan Taoist robe was badly damaged. There were even some wounds on his arms, but no blood flowed out. The talismans of Yin appeared more and more. The cracks in the God-stunning array were gradually mended. The most important thing was that knife marks appeared one after another in the deepest places. Looking at the direction of the old brush pen shop, the Abbey Dean showed an admiring expression and said, "I didn't expect that you could figure out the origin of everything so quickly. It's a pity that it's too late." Ning Ke walked leisurely in the snow to find the place where the knife had fallen. But there was some sadness in the depths of his eyes. Occasionally he would sigh about the past. Emo Shanshan's knowledge of fighting was taught by Ning Ke in the wilderness. She knew how cold and calm he was in battle. So she felt that his behavior was a bit strange. In such a tense battle, it was very unreasonable to sigh about the vicissitudes of life. If it were in the past, Ning Ke would never allow such emotions to appear in him. We rented the old brush pen shop together. We bought the yard at Yanming Lake together. We planted the lotus flowers on the lake together. She liked to weave little things with the willow twigs by the lake. Of course, I taught her that when she was young. Ning Ke said, she likes to buy clothes at the lotus pond because the things there are cheap. She only agrees to order noodles at the building of pines and cranes when she is happy. No matter whether she is happy or not, she likes to buy cosmetics at Chenjinji Cosmetics Store. These are all places she frequents. Emo Shanshan didn't know why he was talking about this. She connected it with the broken lotuses, willows, horizontal boards, old wells and old walls along the way and vaguely understood something. Now, most of the traces we left in this city are basically gone. Ning Ke looked at the brothel ahead and said, "But it's a pity." Emo Shanshan asked, "Why are you doing this?" Ning Ke said, "These days I have been thinking about a question. What method did Haoyin Taoism use to tear a crack in the God-stunning array? Yimingqi is good at scheming and hiding, but his state is too low. Even with the Abbey Dean's guidance, he can't do it. I once guessed that Haoyin Taoism used 1,000 years to come up with some method. But after seeing what the Abbey Dean did after entering the city, I found that he didn't have this ability. I can't understand the origin, so naturally I can't think of a way to repair it. Until just now, when you said that you want to cut the broken lotuses and willows, I suddenly thought of a possibility." He said expressionlessly, "Maybe she doesn't even know it herself. Anyway, the traces she left here are the problems we are facing now." Emo Shanshan was a little confused and said, "I don't understand." "You mean Sang Sang?" Ning Ke said, "Yes, Sang Sang. She is a part of Haoyin. In a sense, she is Haoyin. This city was used by the headmaster to deal with her. In the end, I brought her to this city and lived with her in this city for a long time. Intentionally or unintentionally, she has done many things." Emo Shanshan was very shocked and said in a trembling voice, "This is just a guess." Ning Ke didn't continue to discuss this issue. Looking at the brothel in front, he said, "Only by cutting off all the traces and aura she left in Chang and City can we hope to repair the God-stunning array completely. But if we knew that we had to cut off the past today, why did we come to Chang'an that day?" After saying this, he smiled bitterly. Emo Shanshan looked at his expression and somehow felt bitter in her heart. The two of them held the array eye pestle in their hands. It seemed that they were holding hands, but actually it was not. The chicken soup calligraphy table in the House of Red Sleeves was cut into a pile of useless firewood. Ning Ke took Emo Shanshan to the Chow Mansion on the Spring Breeze Pavilion 2nd Street. The Chow Mansion was heavily guarded. Mr. Chi led dozens of the Fish Dragon Gang's best fighters to guard every corner of the garden. Lindsay was holding the child in his arms and humming a forest song in a low voice. There was a table of mahjong in the front hall. Old Master Chow took a bad tile but couldn't hold it. When he was about to place his next tile, he saw Ning Ke walking in and quickly pushed the tile in front of him down. "We have a guest. Stop playing." Sitting next to Old Master Chow was the prefectural magistrate of Chang'an City, Shangguan Yangyu. His eyes were sharp and he saw Zhang Wanzi mixed in the tiles. His heart was suddenly bleeding, but he had no choice but to stand up and greet Old Master Chow. Ning Ke said, "Nothing else. I just came to say goodbye." He bowed to Old Master Chow and said, "Erba, I may leave first." Old Master Chow didn't respond, but the Grand Secretary Zheng Jing and his wife who were sitting next to the table suddenly changed their expressions. Mrs. Zheng said worriedly, "Be careful. Father-in-law, mother-in-law, please rest assured." Ning Ke bowed deeply and left the Chow Mansion with Emo Shanshan. Old Master Chow said, "It seems that your son-in-law is going to marry a new wife. Mrs. Zeng spat. Then there was silence. No one was in the mood to continue joking. Everyone in the hall guessed why Ning Ke made a special trip to the Chow mansion. His only family in the human world was here. I thought I had found the character, but I didn't find it until now. But I have seen the character, but I can't read it, so I can't write it. It's a pity that I realized it too late, or I could have fixed the God-stunning array. It's a pity that the character was so deceptive, or I could have tried to kill him now. It's a pity that Chang'an is so big that he still saw me. Ning Ke looked at the other end of the long street where the wind and snow were dancing. The figure of the Abbey Dean appeared in the wind and snow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 787. It had been snowing since last night. Chang'an had turned into a black and white cloth, embroidered with palace eaves, Taoist temples, lakes and mountains. One of the roads was foggy and gloomy. Ning Ke placed a lot of needles on that area and sewed it tightly. He wanted to sew up those cracks or embroider a new flower so that the dimmed area could regain its brilliance. Unfortunately, he realized it too late. He didn't place enough needles. The Abbey Dean could always find a place to stand and saw him before he fixed the God-stunning array. Ning Ke and the Abbey Dean saw each other from afar, separated by a long street that was covered by wind and snow. The Abbey Dean had been injured while walking through Chang'an. His Taoist robe was stained with blood, but he didn't fall. They didn't meet, but they had already met. The moment they met, the winner had been decided. Ning Ke knew he had lost. Mo Shanshan glanced at him and scattered the stones in the deerskin bag on the street. Then she left. He took the array pestle and held the hilt tightly. If it was in the past, he would have left immediately once he was sure he had failed. But he didn't do that today. It had nothing to do with courage but confidence. Because he believed that he could win in the end. Because he was in Chang'an. The Abbey Dean glanced at the other end of the street through the snow and wind. The array pestle in Ning Ke's hand suddenly became extremely hot. The place where his palm touched the pestle made a sizzling sound, with green smoke and a pungent smell. This was the first time Ning Ke and the Abbey Dean had really touched each other since the morning. Only with the power of the God-stunning array could he not be controlled by the Abbey Dean's eyes. The power of the God-stunning array spread to the street through the array pestle, protecting his body and mind. The array pestle was a passage, which had endured an unimaginable amount of aura of heaven and earth and rapidly heated up. This kind of burning pain not only fell on his palm but also fell on his heart. But he still looked calm and said nothing. Since it was hot, he could fight. Even in Chang'an, you are still too weak. The Abbey Dean's voice came from more than 10 miles away, which couldn't be covered by the snow and wind. Ning Ke looked at the other side of the wind and snow and said, "In Chang'an, I know everything, so you have never been able to catch up with me. Now I want to try and see if I can be omnipotent." As soon as he finished speaking, he drew his saber and slashed down. The psyche power in his sense of perception overflowed and spread to all directions of Chang and through the array pestle in his hand. It came to the houses in the 365 streets and alleys in the eastern city, to the green bricks and old stones that had weathered countless years of wind and rain, to the 5 lakes in the western city, and to the pavilions and terraces. An ancient and desolate aura spread out from the cracks between the bricks, slowly rising from the depths of the lake covered in ice and snow, and from the depths of the foundations of the pavilions and towers. The old beams creaked, and the limestone slabs produced dust that had accumulated over the years. The hot springs that gushed out from the bottom of the 5 lakes became hotter and hotter. Countless pearl-like bubbles gushed out, and the fish desperately fled in the boiling lake water. If you go, you come back. The God-stunning array sensed the summoning of the psyche power from the array pestle and returned the boundless aura of heaven and earth to the Vermilion Bird Avenue, to the front of him and to the front of his blade. Ning Ke chopped the city out with one chop. On the snow street there were countless slash marks. With a sizzling sound they broke the walls and cut the ground. These slash marks were in pairs, and each pair was a powerful divine talisman. These slash marks condensed the aura of heaven and earth of Chang and were extremely powerful. Each slash mark was above the 5 states and blocked the entire Vermilion Bird Avenue. The slash marks were like cutting grass and killing people was like cutting grass. The eaves and walls were broken, the beams were broken, and the stones and gravel were all shattered. Everything it touched was like withered grass. The slash marks came with the city. The Abbey Dean's indigo robe trembled slightly, and then he disappeared. A slash fell on the street, and with a crisp crack the limestone slabs were broken. The air on the street was also broken. The Abbey Dean fell back on the street, stepping on the snow. A wound appeared on his left leg. He looked at it and the bleeding stopped. The wound was as white as jade. Countless slash marks came from the other end of the long street more than a dozen miles away. The Abbey Dean disappeared again and performed the limitless technique in a small space. The slash marks made by Ning Kai carried the aura of Chang and then cut him out from the interlayer of the chi of heaven and earth. The Abbey Dean disappeared and reappeared from time to time. When he reappeared, he was at the entrance of the alley at the workshop gate, and in the shabby yamen. He was like a divine elephant. Every time he reappeared, there would be another wound on his body. He was the most powerful cultivator in Haotian Taoism for 1,000 years, and now the most powerful man in the world. But facing the power of the entire Chang'an, he could only passively defend. Ning Kai wanted to know if he could be omnipotent in Chang'an. At least for now he seemed to be. The Abbey Dean was cut out from nothingness by the slash marks again. There was a tiny wound on his forehead, right at the end of his eyebrow. The broken eyebrow was like a broken dike, and blood slowly flowed out from the thin line like water overflowing the dike. He looked at the other end of the long street, and his expression gradually became solemn. He suddenly raised his palm and slowly brushed it down in front of him, like an ancient Buddha brushing his face to show his sorrow, or like the face-changing tricks in the Song Kingdom's ancient plays. He wanted to erase the face. The Abbey Dean's slowly falling palm did not erase the blood, nor did it turn the thin line wound into a golden line. It only added a layer of frost to the broken eyebrow and eyelashes. An aura of quietus shrouded his body. At the other end of the long street, another slash came through the snow. The cold wind came first. The Abbey Dean's green sleeves fluttered, and his body expanded in the wind, as if he had become countless times bigger, and was about to break through the sky. In fact, he was still standing on the street and he was still an ordinary Taoist. But his body gave off an aura as vast and boundless as the sea. Ning Kai's slash marks arrived. They arrived at Chang'an. The aura of heaven and earth changed violently. In the wind and snow on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, there seemed to be countless people crying. In an instant he was hit by dozens of slash marks. Ning Kai's slash marks were all above the 5 states, and had the power to cut mountains and break rivers. But the Abbey Dean was already quietus. He was emotionless and senseless without pain or fear. Ning Kai's talisman had the power above the 5 states, and it carried the power of the God-stunning array. On the Vermilion Bird Avenue, it was like the raging waves on the sea of the Kingdom of Song. But the Abbey Dean was already boundless. Both his aura and his body were as vast as the ocean. No matter how powerful the slash marks were, they could only cut a person who did not feel pain. No matter how horrifying the raging waves were, they fell into the ocean and were just a corner of the picture. Quietus and boundless. The Abbey Dean used 2 powers above the 5 states at the same time, and made the 2 become a perfect combination. The wind and snow calmed down again. The Abbey Dean walked forward calmly. Ning Kai's slash marks only left some tiny marks on his body. Some of his eyelashes fell, some of his clothes were cut, and some of his cloth shoes were cut. Other than that, there were no other wounds. Ning Kai looked at the approaching Abbey Dean and said, "So you are a flying ant? I wish everyone a happy holiday." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 788. At the bottom of the giant sinkhole in the western wilderness lived many serfs. They served the monks in the Shenkong temple and maintained the existence of that society. In Haotian's eyes, human beings living on the ground were actually serfs. They were like ants, repeating their boring lives without complaint. However, there were always some unique ants in the ant colony who, for various reasons or no reason, decided to temporarily look away from the rotten leaves and soil to the blue sky. Seeing the blue sky would greatly change the lives of those ants. Some ants yearned for it because they saw it, some were angry because the sky was far away, and some were afraid because they saw it. They trembled and surrendered to the soil, feeling grateful for the gift from the sky. But no matter what the ending was, those ants were no longer ordinary ants. In a sense, they had already left the category of ants because they could fly. The headmaster and Kuhauren were undoubtedly the 2 most incredible flying ants in countless years. Ning Kai said that the Abbey Dean was a flying ant. He was not mocking him but expressing his respect. Actually, there is something I have never understood. Abbey Dean, you have already transcended the mortal world and your vision is no longer in the human world. Then why don't you look at the blue sky again? Ning Kai looked at the end of the long street and asked seriously. The ideas of Haotian Taoism and the academy have never been interlinked. The headmaster and I have different ideas. Every beginning must have an end, and every cycle must have an end. That is the real cycle. The Abbey Dean's voice came from the wind and snow. Just like Chang'an, which the headmaster left in the human world. It is isolated from the heaven. No matter how powerful it is just a pool of stagnant water. Just like the E-talisman you are writing now. It is ferocious but has no way to return. So it is not perfect and has no choice. Then how can it stop me? Ning Ke looked at the wind and snow and said, no choice. Isn't that freedom? The Abbey Dean said, no choice doesn't mean no choice. The aura and the array kept colliding. Countless thin and sharp lines appeared on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The sound of bubbles bursting could be heard from time to time. The snow remnant talisman was broken. The Abbey Dean's voice came closer in the wind and snow. Even with the support of the God-stunning array, you are too weak to defend the city. According to your temperament, you should have fled a few days ago, but you're still on the street. This is a bit surprising. Teacher left this city to me so I can only stay here. If I had understood it earlier, perhaps I would have repaired the God-stunning array 2 days ago. Ning Ke said, it's a pity that she has stayed in Chang'an for too long these years. I'm too lazy and let her do everything. As a result, she has been to too many places and left too much aura. From this point of view, the danger in Chang'an is our responsibility. You're right. If it were in the past, I would have escaped from Chang'an a long time ago. But since it's her and my responsibility and she's dead now, I have no choice but to stay and shoulder it. Because she's my wife, I have to pay for it. The Abbey Dean knew who he was talking about and said, even though you know you can't defend it? Because we know we have to defend. Even if we know we can't defend, we still have to defend. Ning Ke said, this is my Ji Shou. After saying this, he looked at the figure in the wind and snow that was getting clearer and clearer. He clenched the hilt with both hands, slightly bent his left knee and tightened his body like a bow. Then he swung the blade down. He knew what the Abbey Dean said was right. He hadn't found that word yet, so he couldn't perfectly mobilize the God-stunning array. The only divine talisman he knew before was the 2 horizontal talisman, which represented cutting and absolute stubbornness. But it also represented the parallel opposition, and it was difficult to connect with the surrounding heaven and earth. Last night he comprehended the talisman of E. The 2 parallel lines intersected and began to connect, so he could borrow the power of heaven and earth in the God-stunning array and possess the power of one of the 5 states. But the 4 corners of the 2 lines gradually drifted away from each other, unable to be recycled and could only gradually overflow. But he still wanted to give it a try because he didn't believe that anyone could really fight against this 1,000-year-old city. The 2 blades broke through the wind and snow, whistling more and more fiercely. The Abbey Dean looked calm. He once again brushed his face with his palm. His indigo robe fluttered and his aura soared to the sky. The perfect combination of immeasurability and quietus allowed him to integrate this war into another dimension. The array pestle in Ning Ke's hand was as hot as the lava in a volcano. He looked at the floating figure of the Abbey Dean on the other side of the street, and the psyche power in his body kept flowing out. The lake water was boiling and the indigo bricks were trembling. The chi of heaven and earth in the entire Chang'an city seemed to be summoned by Ning Ke to the Vermilion Bird Avenue, and rushed toward the Abbey Dean. The sky above Chang'an city suddenly cleared up. The snow clouds that had been lingering since last night disappeared in a very short time, and the blue sky was revealed. The power of a city bombarded the Abbey Dean's body. Almost at the same time, countless thunders fell from the sky and bombarded the city. The Abbey Dean's figure was indistinct in the wind and thunder. The anger of Haoyin and the power of the human world collided with each other through the bodies of the Abbey Dean and Ning Quebec. There was no falling snow, but there was the sound of falling snow. It was a blizzard. There was no wind, but there was the sound of howling wind. The entire Chang'an city was shrouded in the violent collision of the chi of heaven and earth, and the walls of countless buildings were shaken and cracked. No other sound could be heard except the horrible sound of the wind and snow. The wind and snow gradually stopped and some of the scattered clouds came back. The sun above Chang'an city was a little dim. The Vermilion Bird Avenue was quiet, and the Abbey Dean and Ning Ke stood opposite each other. The distance between them was no longer more than 10 miles, but only a few dozen feet. Ning Ke could clearly see the Abbey Dean's face. He saw the scars on the Abbey Dean's face, the broken eyebrow and fingers. The Abbey Dean walked toward him. The round pebbles on the street rustled and moved to the sides. Ning Ke lowered his head and coughed. He seemed to be in great pain and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Then he suddenly looked up at the Abbey Dean and punched without warning. His eyes were very calm and therefore very cruel. He was like a young male tiger staring at its prey on the grassland. He stood where he was and waved his fist. His fist came to the Abbey Dean's face more than 100 feet away. Since he started cultivating the Great Spirit into the devil, his body and strength had become more and more terrifying. Therefore he never worried about close combat. He had been waiting for the Abbey Dean to come to him. The fist contained the majestic Great Spirit, like a tiger's claw in the night. It was sharp and deadly. The Abbey Dean raised his palm and held Ning Kei's fist. Ning Kei's fist could break down a small building. But when it hit the Abbey Dean's palm, it was like hitting the big swamp in the depths of the wilderness or falling into the sea. Even Yu Lian's fist could not threaten the Abbey Dean, let alone Ning Kei's. The Abbey Dean smiled. The array pestle in Ning Kei's left hand suddenly shone brightly. The chi of heaven and earth and Chang and city all poured into his body through the array pestle and burst out from his fist. I'll go to Hangzhou tomorrow for the annual meeting. I didn't ask for leave, so there will be an update. Also, I want to discuss with everyone that it's okay to scold me these days. I'll try my best to pretend to be blind. After a few days they probably won't scold me anymore. But please don't scold my family and the sub-editors. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 789. Thunder roared on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The Abbey Dean and Ning Kei's fists and palms collided. Countless auras burst out from their bodies and shot out in all directions. Wherever they touched, bricks and stones were destroyed, beams and trees were broken, and houses along the street collapsed. An unimaginable majestic power smashed into the Abbey Dean's palm from Ning Kei's fist. He was like a bridge that connected Chang'an City and the Abbey Dean. The violent chi of heaven and earth rushed out from his bones and flesh, putting him under a great burden. He was suffering. His joints cracked, his eyelashes were slightly burnt, and his body trembled violently. Blood kept flowing out from his lips and fell on the snow. But he was smiling. The Abbey Dean's palm had 3 broken fingers which were as clean as jade. At this moment the fingers suddenly burst and blood seeped out. Then 3 streams of blood shot out and fell on the snow. The smile on his face froze, but it did not fade away. A snowflake floated in front of his eyes and swept past his eyelashes. The color of his pupils gradually faded. Or in other words, the color of the snowflake began to darken. It was gray. The Abbey Dean's eyes turned gray, like the haze above the abyss. This was the second time that his eyes turned gray today. It was the second time that he used the secret method of Haotian Taoism. Gray eyes. The secret method of Haotian Taoism, the gray eyes, was specially used to suck the psyche power and spirit of cultivators. It was very evil and horrible. Prince Longqing learned this method from the Shat hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane, and then absorbed the peerless power of the Halfman Taoist. That was how he became a powerhouse in the wilderness from a useless person. The Abbey Dean's gray eyes were tens of thousands of times more powerful than Longqing's. Facing his gray eyes, which were like the bottom of a dry well, even someone as strong as Yu Lian felt angry and scared. What could Ning Kei do? He felt the horrible sucking power like a black vortex on the Abbey Dean and the wind blowing on his cheeks. His expression did not change and he was calm as usual. He did nothing because the Abbey Dean's gray eyes did not affect him at all. Both the psyche power in his sense of perception and the great spirit in his chest stayed where they were. The Abbey Dean could not take away any aura from him, not even the smell. The Abbey Dean raised his eyebrows. Ning Kei took a deep breath and his chest puffed up like a war flag being blown by the strong wind. The cold wind and snow in front of him were all sucked into his lungs. The blood that spurted out from the Abbey Dean's severed finger turned into a bloody mist and was sucked into his mouth. There were some blood stains on the corner of his lips. Apart from his own, the rest belonged to the Abbey Dean. This scene looked very strange. Ning Kei knew that he was no match for the Abbey Dean, even if he had Chang'an behind him. From the very beginning he never expected to defeat his opponent. He only hoped that he could fix the array of the astonished gods. That was why he was spotted by the Abbey Dean even though he was walking on the street. That was why he waved his blade and cut the talismans on the snowy street. He fought from afar and only wanted to keep the enemy more than 10 miles away. All these signs clearly showed his fear, which could not escape the Abbey Dean's eyes. Therefore the Abbey Dean smiled calmly and approached him step by step. In fact, this was exactly what Ning Kei needed. In a large-scale battle with the city of heaven and earth as the battlefield, he could not find any chance to defeat the Abbey Dean. On the contrary, if he was close enough, he might find a glimmer of hope in despair. Because he was good at close combat. After joining the devil, his body was as hard as stone and he had terrifying strength. Most importantly, he had the Arai pestle in his hand. In the morning he saw the battle between the Abbey Dean and Third Sister by the Yanming Lake. The Grey Eyes was a secret skill of Haoyan Taoism. But Ning Kai knew this skill very well because he had fought with Long Qing outside the Red Lotus Temple. The Grey Eyes came from the practice of Tao Tai of the Devil's Doctrine. The practice of Tao Tai had been lost for a long time. After Lotus died, there was only one person in the world who could use the practice of Tao Tai. That was Ning Quebec. And only Yi Hongyu and Sang Sang knew about it. So he had been giving the Abbey Dean a chance to get close. He was waiting for him to get close. Looking at the Abbey Dean calmly walking toward him, he was nervous and expectant. Seeing the Abbey Dean's eyes turn gray, he became excited and happy. The gray eyes had no effect on him. His Tao Tai began to be released. Like the greedy monster in the legend, it desperately swallowed everything in front of it. The cold wind filled with snowflakes and the mist of blood entered his mouth. At this moment, he seemed to have become a flesh-eating beast, sucking the Abbey Dean's blood and psyche power and spirit desperately. He even forgot to breathe. A faint red passageway appeared between him and the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean's abundant psyche power and spiritual aura quickly disappeared through the passageway and entered his body. Ning Kai's face was flushed, like a drunken man or the morning glow. His eyes were as bright as a golden pond, which was about to swallow the figure of the Abbey Dean. He clearly felt that a pure and clean aura like water kept flowing into his ocean of qi and mountain of snow, cleansing his body. He knew that was the most essential aura of the Abbey Dean. The practice of Tao Tai was far more powerful than the Grey Eyes. Once it was used, it was almost irreversible. Ning Kai looked at the Abbey Dean who was close at hand and smiled. It seemed that he was about to usher in an impossible victory. However, in the next moment his smile stiffened. Because the Abbey Dean was still smiling. The Abbey Dean's spirit and psyche power were disappearing at a terrifying speed, but he was still smiling. His eyes were no longer gray, but as calm as a lake with a hint of mockery. His smile was still calm as if he knew all the changes in the world. Ning Kai suddenly felt that the water-like aura turned into ice. It was not just a psychological change, but something that actually happened in the objective reality. The aura that washed his snow mountain ocean of qi and bone marrow like clear water suddenly turned into ice. Now it turned into countless ice shards and snowflakes, covering every part of his body. It was not because of the practice of Tao Tai that the Abbey Dean's aura changed. It was because another aura of the Abbey Dean was swallowed into his body. It was an aura of absolute quietus. Heat was a kind of movement. Coldness was the reduction of the intensity of movement. Quietus would bring absolute coldness. Looking at the Abbey Dean, Ning Kai knew that he was wrong. Any fighting awareness was meaningless in front of a huge gap in strength. Even if he used Tao Tai to fight back the Grey Eyes, he could not fight back as long as the Abbey Dean gave him a wisp of quietus above the 5 states. His body suddenly became stiff and cold and he could not move. The snow fell on his face as if it would never melt. His sense of perception began to freeze. His body and mind became a cold and dead world. He was connected with Chang'an, but he still could not break this world of quietus. Even the whole Chang'an city began to freeze. I was on the way today. I took a plane to a train and arrived in Hangzhou at night. I wrote this chapter last night. I hope the journey is smooth and not too tiring. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 790. The sky was clear for thousands of miles, but snow suddenly fell. This was what it meant to be 10,000 miles of snow. Heavy snowflakes flew in the air like ashes after burning reeds. They occupied the entire sky and covered the color of the blue sky. The temperature in the city dropped sharply. The icicles on the eaves were so cold that the lake was cracking. The water in the well at the entrance of the alley began to freeze. Ning Kai stood in the wind and snow. His black academy uniform was covered with thick snow. He was like a bridge made of snow that could break at any time due to the weight of too much snow. In this battle he was the bridge. Chang'an City used his blade to attack the Abbey Dean. At this moment, the Abbey Dean's quietus was swallowed by Tao Tai and entered Ning Kai's body. Through the Arai pestle, the quietus was magnified or concretized and covered Chang'an City. The coldness of the snowflakes penetrated the thick academy uniform and reached Ning Kai's skin. The frost on his eyelashes and the snow on his face were so thick that he looked like Sang Sang when she put on makeup for the first time. It was so cold that all movement stopped. Ning Ke, who was occupied by the quietus, felt like he had fallen into the deepest ice cellar. He was so cold that he couldn't tremble or breathe. Even his mind was about to be frozen. He was frozen like the well at the entrance of the alley. At this moment, only the drop of crystal-clear liquid in his abdomen was still rotating slowly, although it had become extremely slow and could stop at any time. The aura of the drop of liquid had the pride of breaking through all restraints, whether it was coldness or quietus. At this moment, his sense of perception had become an ocean covered with ice and snow. Only a fragment was still shining in the bottom of the muddy sea. It was unwilling and violent in the face of the coldness falling from the sky. Ning Ke's great spirit was inherited from youngest uncle, and his fragment of consciousness was inherited from Lotus. Both of them were at the peak of their era, and both of them could compete with the Abidine. At this moment he was in the greatest danger of his life. At the moment when he was closest to death, the great spirit and the fragment of consciousness that had saved him countless times broke out again. Ning Ke suddenly began to tremble. The frost on his eyelashes and the snowflakes on his face were broken and then shot away like sharp arrows, revealing his true face. A mouthful of blood spurted from his lips and dripped down. The blood was very turbid because there were many blood ice particles that had been frozen by the low temperature. The murky blood dripped onto his clothes and onto his left hand. The Arai pestle suddenly became hot after being splashed with the blood. The blood evaporated into steam and blew past his face. Ning Ke let out a cry, appearing to be in extreme pain. The ice armor on his black academy uniform was shattered, like snow being brushed off a stone bridge, revealing his true appearance. He suddenly opened his eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he exerted his strength to break through the ice and snow. Then he let go of the saber. He had to seize this moment of awakening. He held the two ends of the Arai pestle with both hands and swept it horizontally in front of him in the snowstorm. Two lines were drawn in a single sweep, two perfectly parallel lines. The fierce talisman intent suddenly burst out in the wind and snow. Two horizontal character. Under the cover of talisman intent, Ning Ke stepped on the ice and snow, leaped backward and rushed dozens of feet away. The Abidine had proven that he was invincible. Even though he had a city, he was still no match for him. He had almost died from a single glance. Therefore all he wanted to do now was to leave. The further he stayed away from the other party, the better. On the Vermilion Bird Avenue, two fierce talisman intents appeared, like two refined sharp blades. The Abidine raised his right arm and pointed with his finger. Know the masculinity and defend the femininity, known as the stream of the world. Know the black and defend the white, known as the style of the world. Know the glory and defend the humiliation, known as the valley of the world. The Abidine used the finger of the world. The finger intent completely ignored the two talismans on the snow street and flew away. Ning Ke was still moving backward and a bloody hole appeared on his knee. He fell backward and a bloody hole appeared on his shoulder. After several soft sounds, 7 bloody holes appeared on his body. The Abidine used 7 fingers, which coincided with the will of heaven, to cut off humanity. To cut off one's way of survival. Fresh blood flowed out and stained the white snow under Ning Quebec. At this moment he could only sit in an extremely ugly posture and had no strength to wield his blade. The Abidine said, "Ingenuity is a small skill." Ning Ke understood that the Abidine was commenting on the previous battle. He had to admit that the Abidine was right. No matter if it was showing weakness or luring the enemy to get close, it was not a great way for a real battle. Your current state is still far from the real great way. No matter how strong your desire is, it can't make up for it, not to mention that you have taken a wrong path. The Abidine walked slowly and the wind and snow parted him. I have seen your calligraphy. It is different from others. I don't like it because you don't know how to use a clumsy brush. And that word is too heavy, so you have to use a clumsy brush. Ning Ke raised his arm with some difficulty and wiped off the blood on his chin. He said, "If there is a chance in the future, I will remember your teachings and learn how to use a clumsy brush." There is no future. The Abidine sensed 2 figures coming at a high speed in the wind and snow behind him. He knew that they were the powerful senior brother and sister from the academy. He didn't care. The whole city had been frozen by him. What could the people in the city do? Not far from the west of the Vermilion Bird Avenue, there was a plain or even shabby house. It was a common scene in Chang'an. Usually, there would be an old house that had not been maintained for hundreds of years next to an official's office. Prosperity and shabbiness always coexisted, and it was hard to tell whether it was good or bad. This street was called Sanyuanli, where the most common people in Chang'an lived. In a woodshed in the backyard of one of the houses, a young man's angry voice was suddenly heard, accompanied by the sound of slapping the table. "Why only a pot of hot water? Why only a pot of hot water? It's not enough. My mother's feet are frozen so I can't take a bath. And that guy always has a black face. Who is he showing it to?" The woman was sitting in a pile of bedding, holding a 3 or 4 years old girl. She looked at her angry son with a worried expression and said, "We have a place to live and food to eat. It's good." The young man was wearing a shabby cotton-padded jacket. Judging from his appearance, he should be a country boy. He sat at the door of the woodshed, which was the most leaky. Akiji's face had turned blue from the cold wind. He said angrily, "It's just an extra pot of hot water. How hard can it be? It was very cold today." Icicles hung on the eaves, and even the heat from the kitchen could not drift far. The young man was worried about his mother's cold feet, so he asked for hot water from the front yard. But he only brought back a pot and was scolded by the young man in the front yard. He was in a bad mood when he thought of what had happened today. At this moment, the door of the woodshed was pushed open. A young man appeared at the door. He was wearing a tight cotton-padded jacket and looked a little relaxed and arrogant. It seemed that he had been hanging around in the streets for a long time. The cold wind came in through the door and the woman began to cough. But she did not care about herself. She hugged the little girl in her arms tightly and pulled the bedding over the little girl. The country boy looked at the city boy angrily, but he clenched his fists and did not dare to make a move, because the city boy had 2 knives in his hands. One was a chopper and the other was a kitchen knife. I finished writing this chapter in the cafe by the broken bridge of West Lake. I want to argue with anyone who calls me petty bourgeois. It's really not good. The tables and chairs are not good. The shoulders and neck are not good. The wind on the lake is not good. It's good that I wrote it in the afternoon. I'm looking forward to going home. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 791. Since the beginning of the war, the Tang Empire had been burning everywhere. The most tragic place was the northern frontier. The cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court from the wilderness had been fighting with the northern battlefront army. Endless blood had been shed for every ranch and every town. The most tragic place was the eastern frontier. The northeast border military of the Tang Empire had been ambushed by the Yan Army and the Eastern Wilderness Cavalry in the capital city of Qingjing. Although they had made the enemy pay a heavy price, they had no more soldiers to use after this battle. The border was wide open, and the invaders' horses trampled on the fertile soil. The most dangerous place was the southern frontier. The Qinghe prefecture had rebelled and General Su Shi had died. The southern battlefront army had rushed back from thousands of miles away, but it was too late. The disciples of the academy had fought against thousands of enemies and were all seriously injured. The main force of the West Hill Divine Palace could break through the Verdant Canyon at any time and enter the central area. The Wei and Si River valleys, the richest and most central area of the Tang Empire, had not been affected by the war yet. The Tang Empire, which was famous for its efficiency, had begun preparing for the worst situation a few days ago. The stored food from all counties had been sent to Chang'an by caravans. At the same time, they had begun to evacuate people. People in the suburbs of the capital had already been evacuated into the city. Although the evacuation was carried out in an orderly manner and the evacuated people were not that miserable, they were still refugees of the war and could not enjoy a good life. Hundreds of thousands of refugees who had entered Chang'an chose to stay with their relatives and friends. Those who had no relatives or friends in the city were forced to stay with the families in the city by the prefectural magistrate. Haichuan County of Tianbao Prefecture was very close to Chang'an. The young man from the countryside, his mother and younger sister were from Haichuan, but they had no relatives or friends in the city. Therefore, they were arranged to stay with a family in Sanyuanli, which was close to the Vermilion Bird Avenue and usually had spare rooms. This arrangement was more appropriate. The young man from the countryside had been living in this family for several days. Every day he had 2 hot meals to eat. Although he was living in a woodshed and the master had brought several blankets, he was still living under someone else's roof after all. There were many inconveniences. Who wouldn't miss the hot kong, pickled vegetables, and fatty meat at home? This was the arrangement of the imperial court, and the government had promised that all expenses would be refunded afterwards. At such a critical moment, this family in Chang'an would not have any objections. However, the sudden addition of 3 refugees in their family inevitably made them feel inconvenient, especially the young man from Chang'an, who was even more dissatisfied. The young man from the countryside had long been resentful of the attitude of the young man from the city. He thought to himself that if it were not for the fact that the farmers had been frugal enough to send food to Chang'an, they would have already starved to death. The woman understood her son's feelings very well, but she still persuaded him to live in Chang'an. At least he would have hot food to eat, a place to live, and no need to worry about being hurt by those barbarians. What kind of life could he expect? The country kids had been persuaded, but the sudden snowfall last night had caused the temperature in Chang'an to drop since the morning. By now it was unbearably cold. He went to the front yard to ask the host for some hot water, but unexpectedly the young man was stingy and only gave him 1 pot, and did not want to give more. Thinking about his mother's cold legs, he could not suppress his anger. He didn't expect that before he could find trouble with that guy had already barged into the woodshed. "Zhang-san, what are you doing?" The country kid looked at the guy with 2 knives and looked a little nervous. He thought that the other party really had some evil intentions, so he did not dare to resist. Instead, he quietly moved his feet backward and reached out his right hand to the bench next to the brazier. He silently swore in his heart, "If the other party really wants to bully me, then I'll fight." He brought the bench from Haichuan village. It was made of solid hardwood and varnished. It was very heavy and sturdy. When he was a child, he was laughed at for having many fathers. He once tried to fight with this bench and used 3 village children to open their heads. It proved that this bench was very useful. The city kid who had barged into the woodshed with 2 knives was indeed surnamed Zhang, but naturally could not be called Zhang-san. His real name was Zhang Yinzu and he was not ranked 3rd. "Li Si, I have something to talk to you about." Zhang-san looked at the country kid and said. The country kid's surname was Li, and his name was Li Guangdi. He was not ranked 4th. The way the 2 teenagers called each other was actually a continuation of the mutual ridicule and bickering from a few days ago. Li Guangdi looked at Zhang Yinzu's hand with vigilance. But the next moment he found that the situation was not what he had imagined, because Zhang Yinzu's hand was trembling and his face was a little pale. Li Guangdi looked down on cowardly and useless city kids, but after fighting so many times these days, he knew that Zhang Yinzu was not that kind of person. Whether it was a murder or a threat, Zhang Yinzu would not turn pale. Because it was obviously because he was scared. Zhang Yinzu looked at Li Guangdi and said, "I saw a monster." His face was pale, and the kitchen knife and chopper in his hand were trembling violently. There was even a sound of wind. Zhang Yinzu swallowed with some difficulty, looked at Li Guangdi and continued saying, "My family is very afraid, and no one dares to fight that monster on the street, but I want to try." Li Guangdi was a little confused and asked, "What monster?" Zhang Yinzu said, "A guy in cyan clothes with only 2 fingers on his left hand, but he can walk half a street with 1 step, and he can summon the wind and rain. He is a monster no matter how I look at it." Hearing this, Li Guangdi knew what he was talking about and his face suddenly became ugly. Since a few days ago the Chang'an local government, the shops and the men of the fish dragon gang had issued warnings to every family and yard. Although he lived in the woodshed with his mother and younger sister, he also knew what would happen today. The morning snow fell and there was no smoke. Chang'an city seemed to be empty today, but in fact, everyone was nervously and uneasily waiting for the result of the war at home. Li Guangdi woke up very early. He stood in the snowstorm in the backyard and saw many scenes that he had only heard of in stories and legends. He saw the cracks in the snow clouds, he saw countless bolts of lightning falling from the sky, he saw the rain that fell in the middle of winter, and he also saw the burning clouds. He was very afraid, so he stopped watching and began to complain to his mother about the lack of hot water, trying to suppress his fear with his hatred for the boy in the city in the front yard. Although he was just a teenager, he was a Tang. He felt that this kind of fear was very shameful. Li Guangdi never thought that Zhang Yinzu would be so daring to peep at the battle on the street. Thinking back to his previous fear, he felt his face burning up. "Why are you telling me this?" In order to hide his shame, he glared fiercely at Zhang Yinzu. Zhang Yinzu really didn't like hearing his Haichuan accent, but thinking about what he was going to do next, he suppressed the urge to make fun of him and swallowed the saliva that kept gushing out of nervousness. "That green-robed demon is very terrifying. Even the teacher from the academy can't beat him." He said, "I'm ready to go, but the old men in the front yard are too timid. They don't dare to go with me and they won't let me go. I think you at least have some courage. Do you dare to go with me?" Li Guangdi asked, "What for?" Zhang Yinzu said, "Go and help." Li Guangdi asked, "How?" Zhang Yanzu raised the two knives in his hands and said, "Chopper and kitchen knife, you choose first." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 792. Li Guangdi was stunned. He looked at the two knives in his opponent's hands and did not know what to say. Zhang Yanzu said anxiously, "We are about to lose. What are you doing here?" The woman finally understood and was scared. She said, "You are so young. What can you do to help?" Zhang Yanzu waved the knife in his hand and said, "If you have a knife, you can cut people. I have seen many duels in Chang'an blood. I know how to cut people." Li Guangdi hesitated and looked back at his mother. He did not have a father since he was a child and was very filial to his mother. Even when his mother gave birth to a younger sister, he did not change his attitude towards his mother. Zhang Yanzu was a little angry and said, "Country people are really cowards." After saying this, he turned around and walked out of the courtyard. Li Guangdi stopped him and took out a steel fork from the corner of the woodshed. He walked out and said, "When I was shooting at the melon fields, you didn't even dare to kill watermelons." Zhang Yanzu looked at him and said happily, "Li Si, I was right about you." The wind and snow were furious and it was extremely cold. The street was covered with thick snow. Chang'an had been frozen. The Vermilion Bird Avenue was as quiet as the bottom of a snow lake. There was no sound except for a few coughs deep in the snow. Eldest brother was coughing on the other side of the wind and snow. When Ning Kai failed to attack the city and was about to be killed by the Abidine, he could not wait anymore. So he came to the wind and snow with third sister Yu Lian. Ning Kai had not been able to isolate the Abidine from Hao Yan's world with Chang'an. This was definitely not the opportunity that Yu Lian had been waiting for. So they failed again. The Abidine walked to Ning Kai on the other side of the street. His injuries were more serious and he began to cough. But his footsteps were still steady. He stepped on the thick snow on the street and only left light footprints. The shops on the side of the street were closed. The marketplace not far away was as quiet as a tomb. Ning Kai sat on the snowy street, covered with blood. The snow under him was dyed red. It was difficult for him to stand up. Zhang Yanzu and Li Guangdi hid in a house. They looked at the situation on the street through the crack of the door. The weather was too cold at this time. The snowflakes fell on their faces and bodies as if they were frozen. The two youths had been peeping for a while now, but they didn't do anything. It wasn't because they were frozen, but because they felt very lonely and afraid. There was not a single person in the alley. The whole world was so quiet. They had no helpers. They did not see the hooligans who usually ran amok in the streets, the wanderers who were usually envious of, the Yulin royal guards who were idolized by all the Tangs, and the cultivators from the Southern Gate Temple. They could only see each other's pale faces and nervous and fearful eyes. They were brave, but after all they were just ordinary teenagers. When they saw the master of the academy being defeated by the green-clothed monster, the fear that had been diluted by their hot blood once again occupied their bodies and minds. "What should we do?" Zhang Yanzu's voice was a little trembling. It sounded like he would cry the next moment. But he thought that it was his own suggestion and he didn't want to be looked down upon by the country kids, so he forced himself to hold it in. Li Guangdi was relatively calm, but his pale face revealed his true feelings. He looked at the green-clothed Taoist walking on the snowy street like an immortal through the crack of the door. He said in a trembling voice, "I'll listen to you." Zhang Yanzu wanted to swallow his saliva to calm down, but found that because he was too nervous and afraid, his lips and tongue were extremely dry. There was no saliva at all. He couldn't help but feel ashamed. Shame was the most real source of courage, especially for the Tangs. Zhang Yanzu grabbed a handful of snow and stuffed it into his mouth. He chewed randomly and said, "I'll go first." Because there was snow in his mouth and because his voice was a little muffled, Li Guangdi didn't hear it clearly. The next moment he suddenly saw Zhang Yanzu kick open the wooden door and run to the snowy street with a knife. Only then did he understand what had happened. He quickly grabbed the melon fork and followed. When he arrived on the snowy street and saw the green-clothed monster, the courage that Zhang Yanzu had gained from the stimulation of the ice and snow suddenly disappeared. His arms were limp and powerless, and the kitchen knife and hatchet in his hands were dragged behind his body. His posture was very comical, but he still ran. "Monster, give me your life," he shouted. Li Guangdi carried the melon fork and rushed behind him. His face was paler than the snow on the street. His arms kept shaking, and it seemed that the fork would fall to the ground at any time. "F*CKU," he shouted. They didn't know who the green-clothed Taoist was, nor did they know who his mother was. But they knew that he was a monster that even the master of the academy couldn't defeat, so they knew that he was very scary. They were afraid, but they still rushed over. Because they had a breath in their chest and abdomen. They probably didn't know what that breath was because they had no strength. But they knew that if they didn't rush over, they would look down on themselves. Chang'an was silent in the wind and snow. The Abbey Dean was invincible. At this moment, 2 teenagers from Senyuanli rushed out with a kitchen knife and a hatchet, and a steel fork that was used to guard the melon fields. Their voices were very shaky and it sounded like they were crying. They cried and rushed to the unimaginable enemy. The scene looked funny. But it was not funny. Chang'an was quiet, but of course there were people. In the streets under the morning snow, countless eyes were watching the movements on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The Abbey Dean knew it very well. Walking in the snow, he could clearly feel the hostility behind the door cracks. He didn't care because although this war was happening in the human world, it had already gone beyond the scope of the human world. No ordinary people were qualified to participate in this war. The fact that the Academy and the Tang Imperial Court didn't use any military power in today's war was proof. So when he saw the 2 teenagers rushing to him with knives and forks in their hands, he was a little surprised. The Abbey Dean's expression froze, and then he understood and calmed down like the snow melting. He looked at the 2 teenagers and smiled. It was not mockery but pity. But there was no respect either because that was the value of the secular world. He was the spokesperson of Haotian. He looked at the 2 youths as though he was looking at ants on the ground from a high and mighty Haotian. The struggle of ants would not make Haotian feel too much, but only interesting. There was another person on the snow street. Ning Kei, who was sitting in the blood snow, changed his expression slightly. There was a subtle change in his expression. It was not a small change. It was a sudden change. Looking at the 2 teenagers, he realized that there was such a thing as meaning in the world. What he had done for Chang'an was meaningful. In other words, the city of Chang'an and the people living in it were worth working hard for, such as the 2 pale-faced and staggering youths. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 793. I didn't write today not because I wasn't feeling well, but because there was a knot in my chest. I can't blame anyone but myself, because the unhappiness of the readers was caused by me. It was entirely my responsibility, and had nothing to do with the weather or my illness. That's why I'll write 2 chapters of 3,000 words tomorrow to fill in what I wrote today. If there are no problems with the inspection the day after tomorrow, I'll try my best to update 2 chapters a day. Below is the main text. Some readers saw the epilogue of other authors and asked me why I had time to drink during the 3 days in Hangzhou and didn't have time to write. I wanted to explain because it seemed like it was too much. I drank during the first 2 days of the Hangzhou annual conference, so naturally I didn't get drunk. Plus it was after the update. I didn't drink or play on the day before the update, so I really couldn't write anymore. The request for leave for the 3rd day was still there. I didn't say how sick I was and how uncomfortable it was to ask for leave, because no matter how you looked at it, it would seem like a slut was being unreasonable, and it wouldn't be easy to win people's trust. But in reality, all the authors present knew that my leg had basically recovered, and my right shoulder was basically useless. I shared a room with Special White. In the middle of the night, when I cried out in pain while half asleep, it scared him. But when I woke up the next day, I told him I was fine. Yeah, it hurt like hell for a moment, and then it was F***king fine for a moment. What could I do? Could I grab my body and say, if you want to hurt, then keep hurting? I suddenly remembered the first day in Hangzhou. Yun Kai had texted me to ask how my body was. My reply was that I was smiling in front of others, but in pain behind them. Today, the reason for my depression was indeed my own problem. I shouldn't have cheerfully said I was fine, and I shouldn't have walked around Westlake in the rain. I should have laid on the bed and sighed. I shouldn't have liked the liveliness of the world, and I did indulge in pleasure and neglect work. After the annual conference there was supposed to be an event. Before the spring festival many authors went. At the time I thought I really can't go or else I won't be able to explain it to the readers. Now it seems that my decision was very wise. Of course it would be better if I could write more. No matter what, it is a fact that I haven't been updating recently. I apologize again for this. After the inspection, I will resume updating for a long period of time. When everyone calms down and is even happier, I believe that they will laugh when they see that it has been almost a month. Updates are always the way to go. I don't ask for more, but I ask for stability. I understand this and I will try my best to achieve this. I hope you can give me one more day of patience. I'm a person who needs peace of mind. As long as my body is fine, my mind will be fine and I won't be anxious, because I'm very afraid of death. When the time comes, I'll naturally happily throw myself into the business of writing, and I'll let you happily forget all the interruptions and unhappiness. If there really is a problem, then there's nothing we can do about it. We'll talk about the update later. I wish you all the best. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 794. Yes, after I finished writing the previous chapter, I suddenly realized that after I explained it, I was no longer depressed. I regretted it. I wanted to write, but I didn't want to be scolded again and again. I'm going to write. There will be an update today. I don't know when I can write it. Anyway, there will be an update. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 795. The snowflakes fell on their faces. It was cold, just like how they felt at the beginning. But as they ran, their bodies began to heat up, and the fear in their hearts gradually faded. They looked at the Taoist in indigo on the street and felt that he was just an ordinary person. Their breathing became rapid, their blood began to boil, and they felt fearless. Zhang Nianzhu thought to himself, I'll kill you with one strike, or two strikes if that doesn't work. Li Guangdi thought to himself, I'll stab you to death like a needle. The chopper and the kitchen knife came in front of them. The melon fork was also raised in the air. Then they flew to the sky. Seeing the snowy street getting farther and farther under their feet, and the figure of the Taoist in indigo getting smaller and smaller, the two teenagers were terrified and did not know what had happened. The turbulence of the chi of heaven and earth caused by the battle between the Abbey Dean and the Academy remained on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The seemingly calm wind and snow contained so much power that ordinary people could not even get close. Zhang Nianzhu and Li Guangdi wanted to rush over, but the only result was that they would be blown away like two rags. The cold wind whistled and brushed past their cheeks. They fell from dozens of feet in the air and fell heavily on the snowy street. With two slaps, the snow was splashed and the two teenagers spat out blood. Looking at the Taoist in indigo on the street again, the fear in their eyes became more intense. They were in pain all over and did not know if they had broken any bones. They helped each other to stand up and felt each other's bodies tremble. They really cried because it was really painful and they were really afraid. They wanted to wipe their tears but found that they could not. This made them feel ashamed, so they cried even harder and felt even more ashamed. So they raised their knives and forks, crying and rushing to the street again. No official would pay attention to ants crawling by their shoes, and no driver would pay attention to the praying mantises waving their claws by the state highway. After glancing at the two Tang teenagers at first, the Abbey Dean did not pay any more attention to them. He walked calmly on the snowy street, like an immortal or a crane, unstained by the snow and dust. Ning Ke looked at the two teenagers who were running for their lives, and his heartbeat inexplicably accelerated. It was as if he saw a praying mantis struggling to block a wheel, or an ant supporting the sole of a giant's shoe. He knew that the two teenagers could not change anything, not to mention the fate of Chang'an City. Just like how he could not change anything at this moment, including the fate of the two teenagers. He was exhausted, helpless, and extremely unwilling to accept everything that had happened in this snowstorm. This kind of unwillingness was like the sharp claws of a ferocious beast tearing at his spirit, making him nervous and in pain. With just a little bit of force, his body began to bleed, but he endured the pain and slowly stood up with trembling legs, because he knew that the two youths were about to die. He wanted to watch these two youths die. He wanted to stand and watch them die. Zhang Nianzhu and Li Guangdi did not die because they were limping and running at a slow speed. Then something arrived in front of the Abbey Dean. It was a green brick. It was a mottled, mossy, ordinary green brick that had been stuffed in the wall for many years and withstood the wind and rain of Chang, and for many years. The green brick came from an ordinary courtyard beside the Vermilion Bird Avenue. It whistled through the air, flew out of the courtyard wall, and smashed into the Abbey Dean's body. Finally, it fell in front of the Abbey Dean. With a muffled sound, the green brick broke into 4 pieces. Zhang Nianzhu and Li Guangdi stopped and looked at the green brick, wondering if the cultivators of the imperial court had finally taken action. Could this green brick be the legendary celestial device? What happened next coldly destroyed the two youths' hope for a twist in the story. As the bricks broke, a man with a full beard appeared on the wall. The man was still undressed in the cold winter and was covered in grease. No matter how one looked at him, he did not look like a decent person. Zhang Nianzu knew that this man was a famous ruffian in the Senyuanli area. He was only good at 5 things in his life, which were cheating and stealing. Although he was not evil, he was definitely not a good person. He admired the men of the Fish Dragon gang and other gangs, but he did not like this ruffian at all. Somehow when he saw him today he felt disappointed and warm. It was probably because of the ruffian's appearance that he and Li Guangdi no longer felt as lonely and helpless as before. The ruffian did not dare to get off the wall. He sat on the wall in an ugly posture, holding a dozen bricks in his arms and throwing them at the Abbey Dean in the middle of the street, followed by a series of profanities. "I'll smash you to death. You son of a bitch. You son of a bitch. You son of a bitch." Zhang Nianzu came to his senses and cursed along with the ruffian on the wall. His voice suddenly became hoarse and he threw the chopper in his hand at the Abbey Dean. Li Guangdi also threw the melon fork in his hand. The green bricks with residual snow marks kept falling from the top of the wall. The 2 choppers and fork broke through the snow, but none of them could even touch the Abbey Dean's clothes. They all fell to the ground. The Abbey Dean walked on calmly as long as the objects were not close to him and the words were not heard. However, another chopper flew over from the air. A black pot flew over from the other side of the courtyard wall. A bamboo pole for drying clothes fell from upstairs. Boiling hot tea was thrown over together with an expensive teapot. Countless tangs appeared on the courtyard wall and in the tea houses on the street. There was the tea master, the female boss of the tofu stall, urchins and ruffians. They held the heaviest things in their hands and threw them at the Taoist priest on the street. They cursed the noblest Taoist priest and his parents with the most filthy words. The Vermilion Bird Avenue, which was silent a moment ago, suddenly became noisy. Chang'an, which was like a dead city a moment ago, suddenly became alive. The Tang, who had been hiding a moment ago, had suddenly appeared. They used to be afraid, so they stayed at home silently, waiting for the outcome of the battle between Taoism and the Academy. They were even in fear now because they were mortals. But when they found out that the Academy was defeated, they suppressed their fear and came to the place where they were needed, just like the 2 teenagers from Senyuanli and the ruffian. They wanted to protect the master of the Academy in Chang'an, because the Academy belonged to the Tangs, and the country belonged to the Tangs. As the Tangs, they had to contribute even if they had to sacrifice their lives. The men in black from the Fish Dragon gang poured out from the street. Dozens of the last Yulin royal guards rode over from the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The cultivators from the Imperial Center administration secretly came from the wind and snow. The old woman led her family to the Vermilion Bird Avenue. An old man with a stick walked behind the crowd. Not far from the old man was a skinny Taoist priest. The skinny Taoist priest led the little Taoist priest in the temple, holding the incense burner used to worship heaven. He looked fierce like a gangster. Everyone had a ferocious expression on their faces. The kind-looking Tangs, the righteous Tangs, and the pious Tangs all became gangsters at this moment. Chang'an became a city of sin. Because everyone in the city wanted to fight with their lives on the line and kill. It feels good to write it out. It will be 3,000 words tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.